Chapter 1. Marseilles, the arrival. On the 24th of February, 1815, the lookout at Notre Dame de la Garde signaled the three-master, the Pharaon from Smyrna, Trieste, and Naples. As usual, a pilot put off immediately, and rounding the Château d'If, got on board the vessel between Cape Morgiou and Ryan Island. Immediately, and according to custom, the ramparts of Fort Saint-Jean were covered with spectators. It is always an event at Marseilles for a ship to come into port, especially when this ship, like the Pharaon, has been built, rigged, and laden at the old Fosse docks, and belongs to an owner of the city. The ship drew on and had safely passed the strait, which some volcanic shock has made between the Calasirane and Jaros Islands, had doubled pumped, and approached the harbor under topsails, jib, and spanker, but so slowly and sedately that the idlers, with that instinct which is the forerunner of evil, asked one another what misfortune could have happened on board. However, those experienced in navigation saw plainly that if any accident had occurred, it was not to the vessel herself, for she bore down with all the evidence of being skillfully handled, the anchor a cockbill, the jib boom guys already eased off, and standing by the side of the pilot, who was steering the Pharaon towards the narrow entrance of the inner port, was a young man, who, with activity and vigilant eye, watched every motion of the ship, and repeated each direction of the pilot. The vague disquietude which prevailed among the spectators had so much affected one of the crowd that he did not await the arrival of the vessel in harbor, but jumping into a small skiff, desired to be pulled alongside the Pharaon, which he reached as she rounded into La Reserve Basin. When the young man on board saw this person approach, he left his station by the pilot, and hat in hand, leaned over the ship's bulwarks. He was a fine, tall, slim young fellow of 18 or 20, with black eyes, and hair as dark as a raven's wing, and his whole appearance bespoke that calmness and resolution peculiar to men accustomed from their cradle to contend with danger. "Ah, is it you, Dantès?" cried the man in the skiff. "What's the matter? And why have you such an air of sadness aboard?" "A great misfortune, M. Morel," replied the young man. "A great misfortune, for me especially. Off Civita Vecchia we lost our brave Captain Leclerc." "And the cargo?" inquired the owner eagerly. "Is all safe, M. Morel, and I think you will be satisfied on that head. But poor Captain Leclerc." "What happened to him?" asked the owner, with an air of considerable resignation. "What happened to the worthy captain?" "He died." "Fell into the sea?" "No, sir, he died of brain fever in dreadful agony." Then turning to the crew he said, "Bear a hand there, to take in sail." All hands obeyed, and at once the 8 or 10 seamen who composed the crew sprang to their respective stations at the spanker brails and outhaul, topsail sheets and halyards, the jib downhaul, and the topsail clewlines and buntlines. The young sailor gave a look to see that his orders were promptly and accurately obeyed, and then turned again to the owner. "And how did this misfortune occur?" inquired the latter, resuming the interrupted conversation. Illustration: Edmond Dantès. "Alas, sir, in the most unexpected manner. After a long talk with the harbor master, Captain Leclerc left Naples greatly disturbed in mind. In 24 hours he was attacked by a fever, and died 3 days afterwards. We performed the usual burial service, and he is at his rest, sewn up in his hammock with a 36-pound shot at his head and his heels, off El Giglio Island. We bring to his widow his sword and cross of honor." "It was worthwhile truly," added the young man with a melancholy smile, "to make war against the English for 10 years, and to die in his bed at last, like everybody else." "Why, you see, Edmond," replied the owner, who appeared more comforted at every moment, "we are all mortal, and the old must make way for the young. If not, why there would be no promotion. And since you assure me that the cargo is all safe and sound, M. Morel, take my word for it, and I advise you not to take 25,000 francs for the profits of the voyage." Then, as they were just passing the round tower, the young man shouted, "Stand by there to lower the topsails and jib, brail up the spanker." The order was executed as promptly as it would have been on board a man-of-war. "Let go and clew up." At this last command all the sails were lowered, and the vessel moved almost imperceptibly onwards. "Now if you will come on board, M. Morel," said Dantès, observing the owner's impatience, "here is your supercargo, M. Danglars, coming out of his cabin, who will furnish you with every particular. As for me, I must look after the anchoring, and dress the ship in mourning." The owner did not wait for a second invitation. He seized a rope which Dantès flung to him, and with an activity that would have done credit to a sailor, climbed up the side of the ship, while the young man, going to his task, left the conversation to Danglars, who now came towards the owner. He was a man of 25 or 26 years of age, of unprepossessing countenance, obsequious to his superiors, insolent to his subordinates, and this, in addition to his position as responsible agent on board, which is always obnoxious to the sailors, made him as much disliked by the crew as Edmond Dantès was beloved by them. "Well, M. Morrel," said Danglars, "you have heard of the misfortune that has befallen us?" "Yes, yes. Poor Captain Leclerc. He was a brave and an honest man, and a first-rate seaman, one who had seen long and honorable service, as became a man charged with the interests of a house so important as that of Morrel and Son," replied Danglars. "But," replied the owner, glancing after Dantès, who was watching the anchoring of his vessel, "it seems to me that a sailor needs not be so old as you say, Danglars, to understand his business, for our friend Edmond seems to understand it thoroughly, and not to require instruction from anyone." "Yes," said Danglars, darting at Edmond a look gleaming with hate. "Yes, he is young, and youth is invariably self-confident. Scarcely was the captain's breath out of his body when he assumed the command without consulting anyone, and he caused us to lose a day and a half at the island of Elba, instead of making for Marseilles direct. 0025 M. As to taking command of the vessel," replied Morrel, "that was his duty as captain's mate. As to losing a day and a half off the island of Elba, he was wrong, unless the vessel needed repairs. The vessel was in as good condition as I am, and as I hope you are, M. Morrel, and this day and a half was lost from pure whim, for the pleasure of going ashore and nothing else." "Dantès," said the shipowner, turning towards the young man, "come this way." "In a moment, sir," answered Dantès, "and I'm with you." Then calling to the crew, he said, "Let go." The anchor was instantly dropped, and the chain ran rattling through the porthole. Dantès continued at his post in spite of the presence of the pilot, until this maneuver was completed, and then he added, "Half-mast the colors and square the yards." "You see," said Danglars, "he fancies himself captain already, upon my word." "And so in fact he is," said the owner. "Accept your signature and your partner's, M. Morrel." "And why should he not have this?" asked the owner. "He is young, it is true, but he seems to me a thorough seaman, and of full experience." A cloud passed over Danglars' brow. "Your pardon, M. Morrel," said Dantès, approaching. "The vessel now rides at anchor, and I am at your service. You hailed me, I think." Danglars retreated a step or two. "I wish to inquire why you stopped at the island of Elba?" "I do not know, sir. It was to fulfill the last instructions of Captain Leclerc, who, when dying, gave me a packet from Marshal Bertrand." "Then did you see him, Edmond?" "Who? The Marshal?" "Yes." Morrel looked around him, and then drawing Dantès on one side, he said suddenly, "And how is the Emperor?" "Very well, as far as I could judge from the sight of him." "You saw the Emperor, then?" "He entered the Marshal's apartment while I was there." "And you spoke to him?" "Why, it was he who spoke to me, sir," said Dantès with a smile. "And what did he say to you?" "Asked me questions about the vessel, the time she left Marseilles, the course she had taken, and what was her cargo. I believe, if she had not been laden, and I had been her master, he would have bought her. But I told him I was only mate, and that she belonged to the firm of Morrel and Son." "Ah yes," he said, "I know them. The Morrels have been shipowners from father to son, and there was a Morrel who served in the same regiment with me when I was in garrison at Valence." "Pardieu! And that is true," cried the owner, greatly delighted. "And that was Policar Morrel, my uncle, who was afterwards a captain. Dantès, you must tell my uncle that the Emperor remembered him, and you will see it will bring tears into the old soldier's eyes. Come, come," continued he, patting Edmond's shoulder kindly, "you did very right, Dantès, to follow Captain Leclerc's instructions, and touch at Elba, although if it were known that you had conveyed a packet to the Marshal, and had conversed with the Emperor, it might bring you into trouble." 0027 M. "How could that bring me into trouble, sir?" asked Dantès, "for I did not even know of what I was the bearer, and the Emperor merely made such inquiries as he would of the first comer." But pardon me, here are the health officers and the customs inspectors coming alongside." And the young man went to the gangway. As he departed, Danglars approached and said, "Well, it appears that he has given you satisfactory reasons for his landing at Porto-Ferrajo?" "Yes, most satisfactory, my dear Danglars." "Well, so much the better," said the supercargo, "for it is not pleasant to think that a comrade has not done his duty." "Dantès has done his," replied the owner, "and that is not saying much. It was Captain Leclerc who gave orders for this delay." "Talking of Captain Leclerc, has not Dantès given you a letter from him?" "To me? No, was there one? I believe that, besides the packet, Captain Leclerc confided a letter to his care." "Of what packet are you speaking, Danglars?" "Why, that which Dantès left at Porto-Ferrajo." "How do you know he had a packet to leave at Porto-Ferrajo?" Danglars turned very red. "I was passing close to the door of the captain's cabin, which was half open, and I saw him give the packet and letter to Dantès." "He did not speak to me of it," replied the shipowner. "But if there be any letter he will give it to me." Danglars reflected for a moment. "Then, Morrel, I beg of you," said he, "not to say a word to Dantès on the subject. I may have been mistaken." At this moment the young man returned. Danglars withdrew. "Well, my dear Dantès, are you now free?" inquired the owner. "Yes, sir." "You have not been long detained?" "No. I gave the custom-house officers a copy of our bill of lading, and as to the other papers, they sent a man off with the pilot, to whom I gave them." "Then you have nothing more to do here?" "No, everything is all right now." "Then you can come and dine with me? I really must ask you to excuse me, Morrel. My first visit is due to my father, though I am not the less grateful for the honor you have done me." 0029 "Right, Dantès, quite right. I always knew you were a good son." "And," inquired Dantès with some hesitation, "do you know how my father is?" "Well, I believe, my dear Edmond, though I have not seen him lately." "Yes, he likes to keep himself shut up in his little room." "That proves, at least, that he has wanted for nothing during your absence." Dantès smiled. "My father is proud, sir, and if he had not a meal left, I doubt if he would have asked anything from anyone, except from heaven." "Well then, after this first visit has been made we shall count on you. I must again excuse myself, Morrel, for after this first visit has been paid I have another which I am most anxious to pay." "True, Dantès, I forgot that there was at the Catalans someone who expects you no less impatiently than your father, the lovely Mercedes." Dantès blushed. "Aha," said the shipowner, "I am not in the least surprised, for she has been to me 3 times, inquiring if there were any news of the Pharaon." "Peste! Edmond, you have a very handsome mistress." "She is not my mistress," replied the young sailor gravely. "She is my betrothed." "Sometimes one and the same thing," said Morrel with a smile. "Not with us, sir," replied Dantès. "Well, well, my dear Edmond," continued the owner, "don't let me detain you. You have managed my affairs so well that I ought to allow you all the time you require for your own. Do you want any money?" "No, sir, I have all my pay to take, nearly 3 months' wages." "You are a careful fellow, Edmond." "Say I have a poor father, sir." "Yes, yes, I know how good a son you are, so now hasten away to see your father. I have a son too, and I should be very wroth with those who detained him from me after a 3 months' voyage." "Then I have your leave, sir?" "Yes, if you have nothing more to say to me." "Nothing? Captain Leclerc did not, before he died, give you a letter for me?" "He was unable to write, sir. But that reminds me that I must ask your leave of absence for some days." "To get married?" "Yes, first, and then to go to Paris." "Very good. Have what time you require, Dantès. It will take quite 6 weeks to unload the cargo, and we cannot get you ready for sea until 3 months after that. Only be back again in 3 months, for the Pharaon," added the owner, patting the young sailor on the back, "cannot sail without her captain." "Without her captain?" cried Dantès, his eyes sparkling with animation. "Pray mind what you say, for you are touching on the most secret wishes of my heart. Is it really your intention to make me captain of the Pharaon? If I were sole owner we'd shake hands on it now, my dear Dantès, and call it settled, but I have a partner, and you know the Italian proverb, Chi ha compagno ha padrone. He who has a partner has a master. But the thing is at least half done, as you have 1 out of 2 votes. Rely on me to procure you the other. I will do my best. R.M. Moral, exclaimed the young seaman, with tears in his eyes, and grasping the owner's hand. M. Moral, I thank you in the name of my father and of Mercedes. That's all right, Edmond. There's a providence that watches over the deserving. Go to your father. Go and see Mercedes, and afterwards come to me. Shall I row you ashore? No, thank you. I shall remain and look over the accounts with Danglars. Have you been satisfied with him this voyage? That is according to the sense you attach to the question, sir. Do you mean is he a good comrade? No, for I think he never liked me since the day when I was silly enough, after a little quarrel we had, to propose to him to stop for 10 minutes at the island of Monte Cristo to settle the dispute. A proposition which I was wrong to suggest, and he quite right to refuse. If you mean as responsible agent when you ask me the question, I believe there is nothing to say against him, and that you will be content with the way in which he has performed his duty. But tell me, Dantès, if you had command of the Pharaon, should you be glad to see Danglars remain? Captain or mate M. Moral, I shall always have the greatest respect for those who possess the owner's confidence. That's right, Dantès. I see you are a thoroughly good fellow, and will detain you no longer. Go, for I see how impatient you are. Then I have leave. Go, I tell you. May I have the use of your skiff? Certainly. Then for the present M. Moral, farewell, and 1,000 thanks. I hope soon to see you again, my dear Edmond. Good luck to you. The young sailor jumped into the skiff, and sat down in the stern sheets, with the order that he be put ashore at La Cannebière. The 2 oarsmen bent to their work, and the little boat glided away as rapidly as possible in the midst of the 1,000 vessels, which choke up the narrow way which leads between the 2 rows of ships from the mouth of the harbor to the Quai d'Orléans. The shipowner, smiling, followed him with his eyes until he saw him spring out on the quay and disappear in the midst of the throng, which from 5 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, swarms in the famous street of La Cannebière, a street of which the modern Phocéens are so proud that they say with all the gravity in the world, and with that accent which gives so much character to what is said, if Paris had La Cannebière, Paris would be a second Marseilles. On turning round, the owner saw Danglars behind him, apparently awaiting orders, but in reality also watching the young sailor. But there was a great difference in the expression of the 2 men who thus followed the movements of Edmond Dantès. Chapter 2. Father and Son. We will leave Danglars struggling with the demon of hatred, and endeavoring to insinuate in the ear of the shipowner some evil suspicions against his comrade, and follow Dantès, who after having traversed La Cannebière, took the Rue de Noailles, and entering a small house, on the left of the Allées de Mailhan, rapidly ascended 4 flights of a dark staircase, holding the baluster with one hand, while with the other he repressed the beatings of his heart, and paused before a half-open door, from which he could see the whole of a small room. This room was occupied by Dantès' father. The news of the arrival of the Pharaon had not yet reached the old man, who, mounted on a chair, was amusing himself by training with trembling hand the nasturtiums and sprays of clematis that clambered over the trellis at his window. Suddenly, he felt an arm thrown around his body, and a well-known voice behind him exclaimed, "Father, dear father!" The old man uttered a cry and turned round. Then, seeing his son, he fell into his arms, pale and trembling. "What ails you, my dearest father? Are you ill?" inquired the young man, much alarmed. No, my dear Edmond, my boy, my son. No, but I did not expect you, and enjoy the surprise of seeing you so suddenly. Ah, I feel as if I were going to die. Come, cheer up, my dear father. 'Tis really I. They say joy never hurts. And so I came to you without any warning. Come now, do smile, instead of looking at me so solemnly. Here I am back again, and we are going to be happy. Yes, my boy, so we will, replied the old man. But how shall we be happy? Shall you never leave me again? Come, tell me all the good fortune that has befallen you. God forgive me, said the young man, for rejoicing at happiness derived from the misery of others, but heaven knows, I did not seek this good fortune. It has happened, and I really cannot pretend to lament it. The good Captain Leclerc is dead, father, and it is probable that, with the aid of M. Moral, I shall have his place. Do Do you understand, father? Only imagine me a captain at 20, with 100 louis pay, and a share in the profits. Is this not more than a poor sailor like me could have hoped for? Yes, my dear boy, replied the old man. It is very fortunate. Well then, with the first money I touch, I mean you to have a small house, with a garden in which to plant clematis, nasturtiums, and honeysuckle. But what ails you, father? Are you not well? 'Tis nothing, nothing, it will soon pass away. And as he said so the old man's strength failed him, and he fell backwards. Come, come, said the young man. A glass of wine, father, will revive you. Where do you keep your wine? No, no, thanks. You need not look for it. I do not want it, said the old man. Yes, yes, father, tell me where it is. And he opened 2 or 3 cupboards. It is no use, said the old man. There is no wine. What, no wine? Said Dantès, turning pale, and looking alternately at the hollow cheeks of the old man and the empty cupboards. What, no wine? Have you wanted money, father? I want nothing now that I have you, said the old man. Yet, stammered Dantès, wiping the perspiration from his brow. Yet I gave you 200 francs when I left 3 months ago. Yes, yes, Edmond, that is true, but you forgot at that time a little debt to our neighbor, Catullus. He reminded me of it, telling me if I did not pay for you, he would be paid by M. Moral, and so you see, lest he might do you an injury. Well, why I paid him. But, cried Dantès, it was 140 francs I owed Catullus. Yes, stammered the old man. And you paid him out of the 200 francs I left you? The old man nodded. So that you have lived for 3 months on 60 francs, muttered Edmond. You know how little I require, said the old man. Heaven pardon me, cried Edmond, falling on his knees before his father. What are you doing? You have wounded me to the heart. Never mind it, for I see you once more, said the old man. And now it's all over. Everything is all right again. 0035M. Yes, here I am, said the young man, with a promising future and a little money. Here, father, here, he said, take this, take it, and send for something immediately. And he emptied his pockets on the table, the contents consisting of a dozen gold pieces, 5 or 6 5-franc pieces, and some smaller coin. The countenance of old Dantès brightened. Whom does this belong to? He inquired. To me, to you, to us. Take it, buy some provisions, be happy, and tomorrow we shall have more. Gently, gently, said the old man with a smile. And by your leave I will use your purse moderately, for they would say, if they saw me buy too many things at a time, that I had been obliged to await your return, in order to be able to purchase them. Do as you please, but first of all, pray have a servant, father. I will not have you left alone so long. I have some smuggled coffee and most capital tobacco, in a small chest in the hold, which you shall have tomorrow. But hush, here comes somebody. 'Tis Catullus, who has heard of your arrival, and no doubt comes to congratulate you on your fortunate return. Ah, lips that say one thing, while the heart thinks another, murmured Edmond. But never mind, he is a neighbor who has done us a service on a time, so he's welcome. As Edmond paused, the black and bearded head of Catullus appeared at the door. He was a man of 25 or 6, and held a piece of cloth, which, being a tailor, he was about to make into a coat lining. What, is it you, Edmond, back again? Said he, with a broad Marseillaise accent, and a grin that displayed his ivory-white teeth. Yes, as you see, neighbor Catullus, and ready to be agreeable to you in any and every way, replied Dantès, but ill concealing his coldness under this cloak of civility. Thanks, thanks, but fortunately, I do not want for anything, and it chances that at times there are others who have need of me. Dantès made a gesture. I do not allude to you, my boy. No, no. I lent you money, and you returned it. That's like good neighbors, and we are quits. We are never quits with those who oblige us, was Dantès' reply. For when we do not owe them money, we owe them gratitude. What's the use of mentioning that? What is done. Let us talk of your happy return, my boy. I had gone on the quay to match a piece of mulberry cloth, when I met friend Danglars. You at Marseilles? Yes, says he. I thought you were at Smyrna. I was, but am now back again. And where is the dear boy, our little Edmond? Why, with his father, no doubt, replied Danglars. And so I came, added Catullus, as fast as I could to have the pleasure of shaking hands with a friend. 0037M. Worthy Catarus, said the old man, he is so much attached to us. Yes, to be sure I am. I love and esteem you because honest folks are so rare. But it seems you have come back rich, my boy, continued the tailor, looking askance at the handful of gold and silver which Dantès had thrown on the table. The young man remarked the greedy glance which shone in the dark eyes of his neighbor. He said negligently, this money is not mine. I was expressing to my father my fears that he had wanted many things in my absence, and to convince me he emptied his purse on the table. Come, father, added Dantès, put this money back in your box, unless neighbor Catarus wants anything, and in that case it is at his service. No, my boy, no, said Catarus. I am not in any want, thank God. My living is suited to my means. Keep your money. Keep it, I say. One never has too much. But at the same time, my boy, I am as much obliged by your offer as if I took advantage of it. It was offered with good will, said Dantès. No doubt, my boy, no doubt. Well, you stand well with them. Moral, I hear. You insinuating dog, you. Moral has always been exceedingly kind to me, replied Dantès. Then you were wrong to refuse to dine with him. What, did you refuse to dine with him? Said old Dantès. And did he invite you to dine? Yes, my dear father, replied Edmond, smiling at his father's astonishment at the excessive honor paid to his son. And why did you refuse, my son? Inquired the old man. That I might the sooner see you again, my dear father, replied the young man. I was most anxious to see you. But it must have vexed moral, good worthy man, said Catarus. And when you are looking forward to be captain, it was wrong to annoy the owner. But I explained to him the cause of my refusal, replied Dantès, and I hope he fully understood it. Yes, but to be captain one must do a little flattery to one's patrons. I hope to be captain without that, said Dantès. So much the better. So much the better. Nothing will give greater pleasure to all your old friends. And I know one down there behind the St. Nicholas citadel who will not be sorry to hear it. Mercedes, said the old man. Yes, my dear father, and with your permission. Now I have seen you and know you are well and have all you require. I will ask your consent to go and pay a visit to the Catalans. Go, my dear boy, said old Dantès, and heaven bless you and your wife, as it has blessed me and my son. His wife, said Catarus. Why, how fast you go on, Father Dantès. She is not his wife yet, as it seems to me. No, but according to all probability she soon will be, replied Edmond. Yes, yes, said Catarus, but you were right to return as soon as possible, my boy. And why? Because Mercedes is a very fine girl, and fine girls never lack followers. She particularly has them by dozens. Really? Answered Edmond, with a smile which had in it traces of slight uneasiness. 0039M. Ah yes, continued Catarus, and capital offers too, but you know you will be captain, and who could refuse you then? Meaning to say, replied Dantès with a smile which but ill concealed his trouble, that if I were not a captain. Said Catarus, shaking his head. Come, said the sailor, I have a better opinion than you of women in general, and of Mercedes in particular, and I am certain that, captain or not, she will remain ever faithful to me. So much the better, said Catarus. When one is going to be married, there is nothing like implicit confidence, but never mind that, my boy. Go and announce your arrival, and let her know all your hopes and prospects. I will go directly, was Edmond's reply, and embracing his father and nodding to Catarus, he left the apartment. Catarus lingered for a moment, then taking leave of old Dantès, he went downstairs to rejoin Danglars, who awaited him at the corner of the Rue Senac. Well, said Danglars, did you see him? I have just left him, answered Catarus. Did he allude to his hope of being captain? He spoke of it as a thing already decided. Indeed, said Danglars, he is in too much hurry, it appears to me. Why, it seems Moral has promised him the thing. So that he is quite elated about it? Why, yes, he is actually insolent over the matter. Has already offered me his patronage, as if he were a grand personage, and proffered me a loan of money, as though he were a banker. Which you refused. Most assuredly, although I might easily have accepted it, for it was I who put into his hands the first silver he ever earned, but now Dantès has no longer any occasion for assistance. He is about to become a captain. Pooh, said Danglars, he is not one yet. Ma foi, it will be as well if he is not, answered Chatteris. For if he should be, there will be really no speaking to him. If we choose, replied Danglars, he will remain what he is, and perhaps become even less than he is. What do you mean? Nothing. I was speaking to myself. And is he still in love with the Catalane? Over head and ears, but unless I am much mistaken, there will be a storm in that quarter. 0041M. Explain yourself. Why should I? It is more important than you think, perhaps. You do not like Dantès. I never like upstarts. Then tell me all you know about the Catalane. I know nothing for certain. Only I have seen things which induce me to believe, as I told you, that the future captain will find some annoyance in the vicinity of the Vieilles infirmaries. What have you seen? Come tell me. Well, every time I have seen Mercedes come into the city she has been accompanied by a tall, strapping, black-eyed Catalan, with a red complexion, brown skin and fierce air, whom she calls cousin. Really? And you think this cousin pays her attentions? I only suppose so. What else can a strapping chap of 21 mean with a fine wench of 17? And you say that Dantès has gone to the Catalans? He went before I came down. Let us go the same way. We will stop at La Reserve, and we can drink a glass of La Malgue, whilst we wait for news. Come along, said Chatteris. But you pay the score. Of course, replied Danglars, and going quickly to the designated place, they called for a bottle of wine, and 2 glasses. Père Pamphile had seen Dantès pass not 10 minutes before. And assured that he was at the Catalans, they sat down under the budding foliage of the planes and sycamores, in the branches of which the birds were singing their welcome to one of the first days of spring. Chapter 3. The Catalans. Beyond a bare, weather-worn wall, about 100 paces from the spot where the 2 friends sat looking and listening as they drank their wine, was the village of the Catalans. Long ago this mysterious colony quitted Spain, and settled on the tongue of land on which it is to this day. Whence it came no one knew, and it spoke an unknown tongue. One of its chiefs, who understood Provençal, begged the commune of Marseilles to give them this bare and barren promontory, where like the sailors of old, they had run their boats ashore. The request was granted, and 3 months afterwards, around the 12 or 15 small vessels which had brought these gypsies of the sea, a small village sprang up. This village, constructed in a singular and picturesque manner, half Moorish, half Spanish, still remains, and is inhabited by descendants of the first comers, who speak the language of their fathers. For 3 or 4 centuries they have remained upon this small promontory, on which they had settled like a flight of seabirds, without mixing with the Marseillaise population, intermarrying, and preserving their original customs and the costume of their mother country as they have preserved its language. Our readers will follow us along the only street of this little village, and enter with us one of the houses, which is sunburned to the beautiful dead leaf color peculiar to the buildings of the country, and within coated with whitewash, like a Spanish posada. A young and beautiful girl, with hair as black as jet, her eyes as velvety as the gazelle's, was leaning with her back against the wainscot, rubbing in her slender delicately molded fingers a bunch of heath blossoms, the flowers of which she was picking off and strewing on the floor. Her arms, bare to the elbow, brown, and modeled after those of the Arlesian Venus, moved with a kind of restless impatience, and she tapped the earth with her arched and supple foot, so as to display the pure and full shape of her well-turned leg, in its red cotton, grey and blue-clocked, stocking. At 3 paces from her, seated in a chair which he balanced on 2 legs, leaning his elbow on an old worm-eaten table, was a tall young man of 20, or 22, who was looking at her with an air in which vexation and uneasiness were mingled. He questioned her with his eyes, but the firm and steady gaze of the young girl controlled his look. "You see, Mercedes," said the young man, "here is Easter come round again. Tell me, is this the moment for a wedding? I have answered you 100 times, Fernand, and really you must be very stupid to ask me again." "Well, repeat it, I beg of you, that I may at last believe it. Tell me for the 100th time that you refuse my love, which had your mother's sanction. Make me understand once for all that you are trifling with my happiness, that my life or death are nothing to you." "Ah, to have dreamed for 10 years of being your husband, Mercedes, and to lose that hope, which was the only stay of my existence. At least it was not I who ever encouraged you in that hope, Fernand, replied Mercedes. You cannot reproach me with the slightest coquetry. I have always said to you, I love you as a brother, but do not ask from me more than sisterly affection, for my heart is another's. Is not this true, Fernand? Yes, that is very true, Mercedes, replied the young man. Yes, you have been cruelly frank with me, but do you forget that it is among the Catalans a sacred law to intermarry? 0045M. You mistake, Fernand. It is not a law, but merely a custom, and I pray of you, do not cite this custom in your favor. You are included in the conscription, Fernand, and are only at liberty on sufferance, liable at any moment to be called upon to take up arms. Once a soldier, what would you do with me? A poor orphan, forlorn, without fortune, with nothing but a half-ruined hut and a few ragged nets, the miserable inheritance left by my father to my mother, and by my mother to me? She has been dead a year, and you know, Fernand, I have subsisted almost entirely on public charity. Sometimes you pretend I am useful to you, and that is an excuse to share with me the produce of your fishing. And I accept it, Fernand, because you are the son of my father's brother, because we were brought up together, and still more because it would give you so much pain if I refuse. But I feel very deeply that this fish which I go and sell, and with the produce of which I buy the flax I spin, I feel very keenly, Fernand, that this is charity. And if it were, Mercedes, poor and lone as you are, you suit me as well as the daughter of the first shipowner or the richest banker of Marseilles. What do such as we desire but a good wife and careful housekeeper? And where can I look for these better than in you? Fernand, answered Mercedes, shaking her head, a woman becomes a bad manager, and who shall say she will remain an honest woman when she loves another man better than her husband? Rest content with my friendship, for I say once more that is all I can promise, and I will promise no more than I can bestow. I understand, replied Fernand. You can endure your own wretchedness patiently, but you are afraid to share mine. Well, Mercedes, beloved by you, I would tempt fortune. You would bring me good luck, and I should become rich. I could extend my occupation as a fisherman, might get a place as clerk in a warehouse, and become in time a dealer myself. You could do no such thing, Fernand. You are a soldier, and if you remain at the Catalans it is because there is no war. So remain a fisherman, and contented with my friendship, as I cannot give you more. Well, I will do better, Mercedes. I will be a sailor. Instead of the costume of our fathers, which you despise, I will wear a varnished hat, a striped shirt, and a blue jacket, with an anchor on the buttons. Would not that dress please you? What do you mean? Asked Mercedes with an angry glance. What do you mean? I do not understand you. I mean, Mercedes, that you are thus harsh and cruel with me, because you are expecting someone who is thus attired. But perhaps he whom you await is inconstant. Or if he is not, the sea is so to him. Fernand, cried Mercedes, I believed you were good-hearted and I was mistaken. Fernand, you are wicked to call to your aid jealousy and the anger of God. Yes, I will not deny it, I do await, and I do love him of whom you speak. And if he does not return, instead of accusing him of the inconstancy which you insinuate, I will tell you that he died loving me and me only. The young girl made a gesture of rage. I understand you, Fernand. You would be revenged on him because I do not love you. You would cross your Catalan knife with his dirk. What end would that answer? To lose you my friendship if you were conquered, and see that friendship changed into hate if you were victor. Believe me, to seek a quarrel with a man is a bad method of pleasing the woman who loves that man. No, Fernand, you will not thus give way to evil thoughts. Unable to have me for your wife, you will content yourself with having me for your friend and sister. And besides, she added, her eyes troubled and moistened with tears, wait, Fernand, you said just now that the sea was treacherous, and he has been gone 4 months, and during these 4 months there have been some terrible storms. Fernand made no reply, nor did he attempt to check the tears which flowed down the cheeks of Mercedes, although for each of these tears he would have shed his heart's blood. But these tears flowed for another. He arose, paced a while up and down the hut, and then, suddenly stopping before Mercedes, with his eyes glowing and his hands clenched, Say, Mercedes, he said, once for all, is this your final determination? I love Edmond Dantès, the young girl calmly replied. And none but Edmond shall ever be my husband. And you will always love him? As long as I live. Fernand let fall his head like a defeated man, heaved a sigh that was like a groan, and then suddenly looking her full in the face, with clenched teeth and expanded nostrils, said, But if he is dead? If he is dead, I shall die too. If he has forgotten you. Mercedes, called a joyous voice from without. Mercedes. Ah, exclaimed the young girl, blushing with delight, and fairly leaping in excess of love. You see he has not forgotten me, for here he is. And rushing towards the door, she opened it saying, Here, Edmond, here I am. Fernand, pale and trembling, drew back, like a traveler at the sight of a serpent, and fell into a chair beside him. Edmond and Mercedes were clasped in each other's arms. The burning Marseille's sun, which shot into the room through the open door, covered them with a flood of light. At first they saw nothing around them. Their intense happiness isolated them from all the rest of the world. And they only spoke in broken words, which are the tokens of a joy so extreme that they seem rather the expression of sorrow. Suddenly Edmond saw the gloomy, pale, and threatening countenance of Fernand, as it was defined in the shadow, by a movement for which he could scarcely account to himself. The young Catalan placed his hand on the knife at his belt. Ah, your pardon, said Dantès, frowning in his turn. I did not perceive that there were three of us. Then, turning to Mercedes, he inquired, Who is this gentleman? One who will be your best friend, Dantès, for he is my friend, my cousin, my brother. It is Fernand, the man whom, after you, Edmond, I love the best in the world. Do you not remember him? Yes, said Dantès, and without relinquishing Mercedes' hand clasped in one of his own, he extended the other to the Catalan with a cordial air. But Fernand, instead of responding to this amiable gesture, remained mute and trembling. Edmond then cast his eyes scrutinizingly at the agitated and embarrassed Mercedes, and then again on the gloomy and menacing Fernand. This look told him all, and his anger waxed hot. I did not know, when I came with such haste to you, that I was to meet an enemy here. An enemy, cried Mercedes, with an angry look at her cousin. An enemy in my house, do you say, Edmond? If I believed that, I would place my arm under yours and go with you to Marseilles, leaving the house to return to it no more. Fernand's eye darted lightning. And should any misfortune occur to you, dear Edmond, she continued with the same calmness which proved to Fernand that the young girl had read the very innermost depths of his sinister thought. If misfortune should occur to you, I would ascend the highest point of the Cape de Morgiou and cast myself headlong from it. Fernand became deadly pale. But you are deceived, Edmond, she continued. You have no enemy here. There is no one but Fernand, my brother, who will grasp your hand as a devoted friend. And at these words the young girl fixed her imperious look on the Catalan, who, as if fascinated by it, came slowly towards Edmond, and offered him his hand. His hatred, like a powerless though furious wave, was broken against the strong ascendancy which Mercedes exercised over him. Scarcely, however, had he touched Edmond's hand when he felt he had done all he could do, and rushed hastily out of the house. Oh, he exclaimed, running furiously and tearing his hair. Oh, who will deliver me from this man? Wretched, wretched that I am. Hello, Catalan. Hello, Fernand. Where are you running to? Exclaimed a voice. The young man stopped suddenly, looked around him, and perceived Cadaris sitting at table with Danglars, under an arbor. Well, said Cadaris, why don't you come? Are you really in such a hurry that you have no time to pass the time of day with your friends? Particularly when they have still a full bottle before them, added Danglars. Fernand looked at them both with a stupefied air, but did not say a word. He seems besotted, said Danglars, pushing Cadaris with his knee. Are we mistaken, and is Dantès triumphant in spite of all we have believed? Why, we must inquire into that, was Cadaris' reply, and turning towards the young man said, Well, Catalan, can't you make up your mind? Fernand wiped away the perspiration steaming from his brow, and slowly entered the arbor, whose shade seemed to restore somewhat of calmness to his senses, and whose coolness somewhat of refreshment to his exhausted body. Good day, said he. You called me, didn't you? And he fell, rather than sat down, on one of the seats which surrounded the table. I called you because you were running like a madman, and I was afraid you would throw yourself into the sea, said Catullus, laughing. Why, when a man has friends, they are not only to offer him a glass of wine, but, moreover, to prevent his swallowing 3 or 4 pints of water unnecessarily. Fernand gave a groan, which resembled a sob, and dropped his head into his hands, his elbows leaning on the table. Well, Fernand, I must say, said Catullus, beginning the conversation, with that brutality of the common people in which curiosity destroys all diplomacy, you look uncommonly like a rejected lover. And he burst into a hoarse laugh. Bah, said Danglars. A lad of his make was not born to be unhappy in love. You are laughing at him, Catullus. No, he replied. Only hark how he sighs. Come, come, Fernand, said Catullus. Hold up your head, and answer us. It's not polite not to reply to friends who ask news of your health. My health is well enough, said Fernand, clenching his hands without raising his head. Ah, you see, Danglars, said Catullus, winking at his friend. This is how it is. Fernand, whom you see here, is a good and brave Catalan, one of the best fishermen in Marseilles, and he is in love with a very fine girl, named Mercedes. But it appears, unfortunately, that the fine girl is in love with the mate of the Pharaon. And as the Pharaon arrived today, why, you understand. No, I do not understand, said Danglars. Poor Fernand has been dismissed, continued Catullus. Well, and what then? Said Fernand, lifting up his head, and looking at Catullus like a man who looks for someone on whom to vent his anger. Mercedes is not accountable to any person, is she? Is she not free to love whomsoever she will? Oh, if you take it in that sense, said Catullus, it is another thing. But I thought you were a Catalan, and they told me the Catalans were not men to allow themselves to be supplanted by a rival. It was even told me that Fernand, especially, was terrible in his vengeance. Fernand smiled piteously. A lover is never terrible, he said. Poor fellow, remarked Danglars, affecting to pity the young man from the bottom of his heart. Why, you see, he did not expect to see Dantès return so suddenly. He thought he was dead, perhaps, or perchance faithless. These things always come on us more severely when they come suddenly. Ah, ma foi, under any circumstances, said Catullus, who drank as he spoke, and on whom the fumes of the wine began to take effect. Under any circumstances, Fernand is not the only person put out by the fortunate arrival of Dantès, is he, Danglars? No, you are right, and I should say that would bring him ill luck. Well, never mind, answered Catullus, pouring out a glass of wine for Fernand, and filling his own for the 8th or 9th time, while Danglars had merely sipped his. Never mind. In the meantime he marries Mercedes, the lovely Mercedes, at least he returns to do that. During this time Danglars fixed his piercing glance on the young man, on whose heart Catullus' words fell like molten lead. And when is the wedding to be? He asked. Oh, it is not yet fixed, murmured Fernand. No, but it will be, said Catullus, as surely as Dantès will be captain of the Pharaon. Danglars? Danglars shuddered at this unexpected attack, and turned to Catullus, whose countenance he scrutinized, to try and detect whether the blow was premeditated. But he read nothing but envy in a countenance already rendered brutal and stupid by drunkenness. Well, said he, filling the glasses, let us drink to Captain Edmond Dantès, husband of the beautiful Catalane. Catullus raised his glass to his mouth with unsteady hand, and swallowed the contents at a gulp. Fernand dashed his on the ground. Stammered Catullus. What do I see down there by the wall, in the direction of the Catalans? Look, Fernand, your eyes are better than mine. I believe I see double. You know wine is a deceiver, but I should say it was 2 lovers walking side by side, and hand in hand. Heaven forgive me, they do not know that we can see them, and they are actually embracing. Danglars did not lose one pang that Fernand endured. Do you know them, Fernand? He said. Yes, was the reply in a low voice. It is Edmond and Mercedes. Ah, see there now, said Catullus, and I did not recognize them. Hello, Dantès. Hello, lovely damsel. Come this way, and let us know when the wedding is to be, for Fernand here is so obstinate he will not tell us. Hold your tongue, will you? Said Danglars, pretending to restrain Catullus, who, with the tenacity of drunkards, leaned out of the arbor. Try to stand upright, and let the lovers make love without interruption. See, look at Fernand, and follow his example. He is well behaved. 0051M. Fernand, probably excited beyond bearing, pricked by Danglars, as the bull is by the bandolieros, was about to rush out. For he had risen from his seat, and seemed to be collecting himself to dash headlong upon his rival, when Mercédès, smiling and graceful, lifted up her lovely head, and looked at them with her clear and bright eyes. At this Fernand recollected her threat of dying if Edmond died, and dropped again heavily on his seat. Danglars looked at the two men, one after the other, the one brutalized by liquor, the other overwhelmed with love. "I shall get nothing from these fools," he muttered. "And I am very much afraid of being here between a drunkard and a coward. Here's an envious fellow making himself boozy on wine when he ought to be nursing his wrath. And here is a fool who sees the woman he loves stolen from under his nose, and takes on like a big baby. Yet this Catalan has eyes that glisten like those of the vengeful Spaniards, Sicilians and Calabrians, and the other has fists big enough to crush an ox at one blow. Unquestionably, Edmond's star is in the ascendant, and he will marry the splendid girl. He will be captain too, and laugh at us all unless—" a sinister smile passed over Danglars' lips. "Unless I take a hand in the affair," he added. "Hullo," continued Cadaris, half rising, and with his fist on the table. "Hullo, Edmond. Do you not see your friends, or are you too proud to speak to them?" "No, my dear fellow," replied Dantès. "I am not proud, but I am happy, and happiness blinds, I think, more than pride." "Ah, very well, that's an explanation," said Cadaris. "How do you do, Madame Dantès?" Mercédès courtesied gravely, and said, "That is not my name, and in my country it bodes ill fortune, they say, to call a young girl by the name of her betrothed before he becomes her husband. So call me Mercédès if you please." "We must excuse our worthy neighbor, Cadaris," said Dantès. "He is so easily mistaken." "So then the wedding is to take place immediately, M. Dantès," said Danglars, bowing to the young couple. "As soon as possible, M. Danglars. Today all preliminaries will be arranged at my father's, and tomorrow, or next day at latest, the wedding festival here at La Réserve. My friends will be there, I hope. That is to say, you are invited, M. Danglars, and you, Cadaris." "And Fernand," said Cadaris with a chuckle. "Fernand, too, is invited." "My wife's brother is my brother," said Edmond. "And we, Mercédès and I, should be very sorry if he were absent at such a time." Fernand opened his mouth to reply, but his voice died on his lips, and he could not utter a word. "Today the preliminaries, tomorrow or next day the ceremony. You are in a hurry, Captain." "Danglars," said Edmond, smiling, "I will say to you as Mercédès said just now to Cadaris, do not give me a title which does not belong to me. That may bring me bad luck." "Your pardon," replied Danglars. "I merely said you seemed in a hurry, and we have lots of time. The Pharaon cannot be under way again in less than 3 months. We are always in a hurry to be happy, M. Danglars, for when we have suffered a long time, we have great difficulty in believing in good fortune. But it is not selfishness alone that makes me thus in haste. I must go to Paris." "Ah, really? To Paris? And will it be the first time you have ever been there, Dantès?" "Yes." "Have you business there?" "Not of my own. The last commission of poor Captain Leclerc. You know to what I allude, Danglars. It is sacred. Besides, I shall only take the time to go and return." Yes, I understand," said Danglars, and then in a low tone he added, "To Paris, no doubt to deliver the letter which the Grand Marshal gave him. Ah, this letter gives me an idea, a capital idea. Ah, Dantès, my friend, you are not yet registered number 1 on board the good ship Pharaon." Then turning towards Edmond, who was walking away, "A pleasant journey," he cried. "Thank you," said Edmond with a friendly nod, and the two lovers continued on their way, as calm and joyous as if they were the very elect of heaven. Chapter 4. Conspiracy. Danglars followed Edmond and Mercédès with his eyes until the two lovers disappeared behind one of the angles of Fort St. Nicholas. Then turning round he perceived Fernand, who had fallen, pale and trembling, into his chair, while Cadaris stammered out the words of a drinking song. "Well, my dear sir," said Danglars to Fernand, "here is a marriage which does not appear to make everybody happy." "It drives me to despair," said Fernand. "Do you then love Mercédès?" "I adore her. For long. As long as I have known her, always." "And you sit there, tearing your hair, instead of seeking to remedy your condition. I did not think that was the way of your people." What would you have me do? Said Fernand. How do I know? Is it my affair? I am not in love with Mademoiselle Mercedes. But for you, in the words of the Gospel, seek, and you shall find. I have found already. What? I would stab the man, but the woman told me that if any misfortune happened to her betrothed, she would kill herself. Pooh. Women say those things but never do them. You do not know Mercedes. What she threatens she will do. Idiot, muttered Danglars. Whether she kill herself or not, what matter, provided Dantès is not captain? Before Mercedes should die, replied Fernand, with the accents of unshaken resolution, I would die myself. That's what I call love, said Cadaris with a voice more tipsy than ever. That's love, or I don't know what love is. Come, said Danglars. You appear to me a good sort of fellow, and hang me. I should like to help you, but... Yes, said Cadaris. But how? My dear fellow, replied Danglars, you are 3 parts drunk. Finish the bottle, and you will be completely so. Drink then, and do not meddle with what we are discussing, for that requires all one's wit and cool judgment. I drunk, said Cadaris. Well, that's a good one. I could drink 4 more such bottles. They are no bigger than cologne flasks. Père Pamphile more wine. And Cadaris rattled his glass upon the table. You were saying, sir, said Fernand, awaiting with great anxiety the end of this interrupted remark. What was I saying? I forget. This drunken Cadaris has made me lose the thread of my sentence. Drunk, if you like, so much the worse for those who fear wine, for it is because they have bad thoughts which they are afraid the liquor will extract from their hearts. And Cadaris began to sing the 2 last lines of a song very popular at the time. Tous les méchants sont buveurs d'eau. C'est bien prouvé par le déluge. 1. You said, sir, you would like to help me, but... Yes, but I added, to help you it would be sufficient that Dantès did not marry her you love. And the marriage may easily be thwarted, methinks, and yet Dantès need not die. Death alone can separate them, remarked Fernand. You talk like a noodle, my friend, said Cadaris. And here is Danglars, who is a wide-awake, clever, deep fellow, who will prove to you that you are wrong. Prove it, Danglars. I have answered for you. Say there is no need why Dantès should die. It would indeed be a pity he should. Dantès is a good fellow. I like Dantès. Dantès, your health. Fernand rose impatiently. Let him run on, said Danglars, restraining the young man. Drunk as he is not much out in what he says. Absence severs as well as death, and if the walls of a prison were between Edmond and Mercedes they would be as effectually separated as if he lay under a tombstone. 0056M. Yes, but one gets out of prison, said Cadaris, who with what sense was left him listened eagerly to the conversation. And when one gets out and one's name is Edmond Dantès, one seeks revenge. What matters that? Muttered Fernand. And why, I should like to know, persisted Cadaris. Should they put Dantès in prison? Well then I should say neither robbed nor killed nor murdered. Danglars. That hold
if after a
voyage
such
such
as
as
Dantès has just made, I won't hold my tongue which he touched at the island of Elba.
No, I say I want to denounce him to the Dantès to the Bonaparte. I like Dantès. You're wrong. Dantès with us to Marseilles, and he swallowed another glass of wine. I will not.
Yes,
0057M. You will not. Danglars saw in the just in front of him the progress of his there's liberty for all the world. And turning towards Fernand Danglars, well, you understand there is no need to kill him. But Dantès cannot remain forever in prison. Danglars took advantage of others of having Dantès arrested. And the day when he comes out towards Marseilles by the port who be found of his staggering as he went. But why should I meddle? They had advanced nothing better. It is no affair of mine. Danglars looked back. I know not why you meddle. Yes, and Mercedes seizing his arm, and putting it into his pocket, you have some motive of personal hatred against Dantès, dearly beloved himself hates is never mistaken in the sentiments of others. Going to the Catalans, motives of hatred against Dantès. Hello, Fernand, it would be much better to I saw you were unhappy, this inhabitants interested me, and run right by the road to the VA's. The writer may not believe I act for my own account, said Cadaris. My dear friend, I should have sworn that in Danglars' uniting practice. And Danglars rose as if he meant left hand, said Danglars. writing reversed from his usual style. Now the thing is at work and totally unlike it. Very little consequence to me at the end of the matter whether you have any feeling not against Dante. The honorable, I hate him's attorney. I confess it openly. A friend of the throne and religion, touching the phone at one Edmond Dantès, provided it is not ship of a man. The feast Mercedes has ready on the second floor having touched at Naples and Porto Ferrajo. Caterus, already adjusted by Marat, the apartment desk now raised purpose was spacious and non with a letter number of Bonaparte's committee over each of which was written a golden letter. Who talks of killing Dante? Reason for the letter would have found upon him of France or at his father's. My friend windows and this would not offer to share his money with me. Very good, as I shared mine with him. And although the entertainment has revenge 12 like common sense, an hour previous said a word about killing himself, filled with impatience, and the matter will affect its own way. We were merely joking. Drink to his health. The letter as I am doing, and other personal friends of the bridegroom interfere with us. The whole of whom had arrayed themselves in their choice and Danglars wrote the address in order to do greater honor to yes, and that's all settled. Various rumors were afloat to the effect by the last effort of Vincent had promised to attend the reading of the letter. But all seemed unanimous in doubting all the misery which you undertook in inducing condescension could possibly intend, and that's all settled. The French have only superiority over the Spaniards, accompanied by Germany to reach the letter confirmed the report. Said Danglars that he had recently gone with them moral, and as what I myself assured him of his intention to die among the first and foremost. I should be sorry later anything happened to Moral appeared, and the worthy Dantès enthusiastic burst of applause from the letter, and without my visit of the shrimp in the corner of the arbor, that the man's wedding feast called for non-loudly honor would air my friend first on that and I won't have him ill-used. And as Dantès thinks of using him beloved the waiter certainly neither I nor sailors put no restraint on my tumultuous joy when finding that the opinion and still remains superior, letting his hand drop on the coincided with there is here wherewithal flung in the entrance sure than if we laid it at the corner of the Caterus were dispatched have some have always had more dread of to drink to the bottle of the arrival of the Mercedes than of a sword. You have had too much already. The fellow is not so drunk and to beseech him to continue. Danglars and Caterus set off because unable to stand on your legs. But ere they had gone many steps, Caterus rising with all the offended hand from the drunken man throw the glass. I can't keep on my leg watched him attendance on a bride. I can go up over Danglars' precious sauce on his and with the whole bride rested on, or rather his lips wore their usual sinister smile. Take your bet. Neither Mercedes nor Edmond to return. Saw the final glimmer on Caterus' reason vanishing. They were so very well they were conscious only of the sunshine and the presence of each other. At all, having acquitted themselves of their errand, and exchanged a hearty shake of the hand with Edmond, Danglars and Caterus took their places beside Fernand and old Dantès, the latter of whom attracted universal notice. The old man was attired in a suit of glistening watered silk, trimmed with steel buttons, beautifully cut and polished. His thin but wiry legs were arrayed in a pair of richly embroidered clock stockings, evidently of English manufacture, while from his three-cornered hat depended a long streaming knot of white and blue ribbons. Thus he came along, supporting himself on a curiously carved stick, his aged countenance lit up with happiness, looking for all the world like one of the aged dandies of 1796, parading the newly opened gardens of the Luxembourg and Tuileries. Beside him glided Caterus, whose desire to partake of the good things provided for the wedding party had induced him to become reconciled to the Dantès, father and son, although there still lingered in his mind a faint and unperfect recollection of the events of the preceding night, just as the brain retains on waking in the morning the dim and misty outline of a dream. 0065M. As Danglars approached the disappointed lover, he cast on him a look of deep meaning, while Fernand, as he slowly paced behind the happy pair, who seemed, in their own unmixed content, to have entirely forgotten that such a being as himself existed, was pale and abstracted. Occasionally, however, a deep flush would overspread his countenance, and a nervous contraction distort his features, while, with an agitated and restless gaze, he would glance in the direction of Marseilles, like one who either anticipated or foresaw some great and important event. Dantès himself was simply, but becomingly, clad in the dress peculiar to the merchant service, a costume somewhat between a military and a civil garb, and with his fine countenance, radiant with joy and happiness, a more perfect specimen of manly beauty could scarcely be imagined. Lovely as the Greek girls of Cyprus or Chios, Mercedes boasted the same bright flashing eyes of jet, and ripe, round coral lips. She moved with the light, free step of an Arlesian or an Andalusian. One more practiced in the arts of great cities would have hid her blushes beneath a veil, or at least have cast down her thickly fringed lashes, so as to have concealed the liquid luster of her animated eyes. But on the contrary, the delighted girl looked around her with a smile that seemed to say, "If you are my friends, rejoice with me, for I am very happy." As soon as the bridal party came in sight of La Réserve, M. Morel descended and came forth to meet it, followed by the soldiers and sailors there assembled, to whom he had repeated the promise already given, that Dantès should be the successor to the late Captain Leclerc. Edmond, at the approach of his patron, respectfully placed the arm of his affianced bride within that of M. Morel, who forthwith conducting her up the flight of wooden steps leading to the chamber in which the feast was prepared, was gaily followed by the guests, beneath whose heavy tread the slight structure creaked and groaned for the space of several minutes. "Father," said Mercédès, stopping when she had reached the center of the table, "sit, I pray you, on my right hand. On my left I will place him who has ever been as a brother to me," pointing with a soft and gentle smile to Fernand, but her words and looks seemed to inflict the direst torture on him, for his lips became ghastly pale, and even beneath the dark hue of his complexion the blood might be seen retreating as though some sudden pang drove it back to the heart. During this time Dantès, at the opposite side of the table, had been occupied in similarly placing his most honored guests. M. Morel was seated at his right hand, Danglars at his left, while at a sign from Edmond, the rest of the company ranged themselves as they found it most agreeable. Then they began to pass around the dusky, piquant, Arlesian sausages, and lobsters in their dazzling red cuirasses, prawns of large size and brilliant color, the echinus with its prickly outside and dainty morsel within, the clovis, esteemed by the epicures of the South as more than rivaling the exquisite flavor of the oyster North. All the delicacies, in fact, that are cast up by the wash of waters on the sandy beach, and styled by the grateful fishermen fruits of the sea. "A pretty silence truly," said the old father of the bridegroom, as he carried to his lips a glass of wine of the hue and brightness of the topaz, and which had just been placed before Mercédès herself. "Now would anybody think that this room contained a happy, merry party, who desire nothing better than to laugh and dance the hours away?" "Ah," sighed Cataris, "a man cannot always feel happy because he is about to be married." "The truth is," replied Dantès, "that I am too happy for noisy mirth. If that is what you meant by your observation, my worthy friend, you are right. Joy takes a strange effect at times, it seems to oppress us almost the same as sorrow." Danglars looked towards Fernand, whose excitable nature received and betrayed each fresh impression. "Why, what ails you?" asked he of Edmond. "Do you fear any approaching evil? I should say that you were the happiest man alive at this instant." "And that is the very thing that alarms me," returned Dantès. "Man does not appear to me to be intended to enjoy felicity so unmixed. Happiness is like the enchanted palaces we read of in our childhood, where fierce fiery dragons defend the entrance and approach, and monsters of all shapes and kinds, requiring to be overcome ere victory is ours. I own that I am lost in wonder to find myself promoted to an honor of which I feel myself unworthy, that of being the husband of Mercédès." "Nay, nay," cried Cataris, smiling. "You have not attained that honor yet. Mercédès is not yet your wife. Just assume the tone and manner of a husband, and see how she will remind you that your hour is not yet come." The bride blushed, while Fernand, restless and uneasy, seemed to start at every fresh sound, and from time to time wiped away the large drops of perspiration that gathered on his brow. "Well, never mind that, neighbor Cataris. It is not worthwhile to contradict me for such a trifle as that. 'Tis true that Mercédès is not actually my wife, but," added he, drawing out his watch, "in an hour and a half she will be." A general exclamation of surprise ran round the table, with the exception of the elder Dantès, whose laugh displayed the still perfect beauty of his large white teeth. Mercédès looked pleased and gratified, while Fernand grasped the handle of his knife with a convulsive clutch. "In an hour?" inquired Danglars, turning pale. "How is that, my friend?" "Why, thus it is," replied Dantès. "Thanks to the influence of M. Morel, to whom, next to my father, I owe every blessing I enjoy, every difficulty has been removed. We have purchased permission to waive the usual delay, and at 2:30 the mayor of Marseilles will be waiting for us at the city hall. Now, as 1:15 has already struck, I do not consider I have asserted too much in saying that in another hour and 30 minutes Mercedes will have become Madame Dantès. 0069M. Fernand closed his eyes. A burning sensation passed across his brow, and he was compelled to support himself by the table to prevent his falling from his chair. But in spite of all his efforts, he could not refrain from uttering a deep groan, which, however, was lost amid the noisy felicitations of the company. "Upon my word," cried the old man, "you make short work of this kind of affair. Arrived here only yesterday morning, and married today at 3 o'clock. Commend me to a sailor for going the quick way to work." "But," asked Danglars in a timid tone, "how did you manage about the other formalities, the contract, the settlement?" "The contract," answered Dantès laughingly. "It didn't take long to fix that. Mercedes has no fortune. I have none to settle on her. So you see, our papers were quickly written out, and certainly do not come very expensive." This joke elicited a fresh burst of applause, so that what we presume to be merely the betrothal feast turns out to be the actual wedding dinner, said Danglars. "No, no," answered Dantès. "Don't imagine I am going to put you off in that shabby manner. Tomorrow morning I start for Paris. 4 days to go, and the same to return, with 1 day to discharge the commission entrusted to me, is all the time I shall be absent. I shall be back here by the 1st of March, and on the 2nd I give my real marriage feast." This prospect of fresh festivity redoubled the hilarity of the guests to such a degree, that the elder Dantès, who at the commencement of the repast, had commented upon the silence that prevailed, now found it difficult, amid the general din of voices, to obtain a moment's tranquillity in which to drink to the health and prosperity of the bride and bridegroom. Dantès, perceiving the affectionate eagerness of his father, responded by a look of grateful pleasure, while Mercedes glanced at the clock and made an expressive gesture to Edmond. Around the table reigned that noisy hilarity which usually prevails at such a time among people sufficiently free from the demands of social position, not to feel the trammels of etiquette. Such as at the commencement of the repast had not been able to seat themselves according to their inclination rose unceremoniously, and sought out more agreeable companions. Everybody talked at once, without waiting for a reply, and each one seemed to be contented with expressing his or her own thoughts. Fernand's paleness appeared to have communicated itself to Danglars. As for Fernand himself, he seemed to be enduring the tortures of the damned. Unable to rest, he was among the first to quit the table, and as though seeking to avoid the hilarious mirth that rose in such deafening sounds, he continued, in utter silence, to pace the farther end of the salon. Cadaris approached him just as Danglars, whom Fernand seemed most anxious to avoid, had joined him in a corner of the room. "Upon my word," said Cadaris, from whose mind the friendly treatment of Dantès, united with the effect of the excellent wine he had partaken of, had effaced every feeling of envy or jealousy at Dantès' good fortune. "Upon my word, Dantès is a downright good fellow, and when I see him sitting there beside his pretty wife that is so soon to be, I cannot help thinking it would have been a great pity to have served him that trick you were planning yesterday." "Oh, there was no harm meant," answered Danglars. "At first I certainly did feel somewhat uneasy as to what Fernand might be tempted to do, but when I saw how completely he had mastered his feelings, even so far as to become one of his rival's attendants, I knew there was no further cause for apprehension." Cadaris looked full at Fernand. He was ghastly pale. "Certainly," continued Danglars, "the sacrifice was no trifling one, when the beauty of the bride is concerned. Upon my soul, that future captain of mine is a lucky dog. Gad, I only wish he would let me take his place." "Shall we not set forth?" asked the sweet silvery voice of Mercedes. 2 o'clock has just struck, and you know we are expected in a quarter of an hour. 0071M. "To be sure, to be sure," cried Dantès, eagerly quitting the table. "Let us go directly." His words were re-echoed by the whole party, with vociferous cheers. At this moment Danglars, who had been incessantly observing every change in Fernand's look and manner, saw him stagger and fall back, with an almost convulsive spasm, against a seat placed near one of the open windows. At the same instant his ear caught a sort of indistinct sound on the stairs, followed by the measured tread of soldiery, with the clanking of swords and military accoutrements. Then came a hum and buzz as of many voices, so as to deaden even the noisy mirth of the bridal party, among whom a vague feeling of curiosity and apprehension quelled every disposition to talk, and almost instantaneously the most death-like stillness prevailed. The sounds drew nearer. 3 blows were struck upon the panel of the door. The company looked at each other in consternation. "I demand admittance," said a loud voice outside the room. "In the name of the law." As no attempt was made to prevent it, the door was opened, and a magistrate, wearing his official scarf, presented himself, followed by 4 soldiers and a corporal. Uneasiness now yielded to the most extreme dread on the part of those present. "May I venture to inquire the reason of this unexpected visit?" said M. Morel, addressing the magistrate, whom he evidently knew. "There is doubtless some mistake easily explained." "If it be so," replied the magistrate, "rely upon every reparation being made. Meanwhile, I am the bearer of an order of arrest, and although I most reluctantly perform the task assigned me, it must, nevertheless, be fulfilled." Who among the persons here assembled answers to the name of Edmond Dantès? Every eye was turned towards the young man who, spite of the agitation he could not but feel, advanced with dignity, and said in a firm voice, "I am he. What is your pleasure with me?" "Edmond Dantès," replied the magistrate. "I arrest you in the name of the law." "Me?" repeated Edmond, slightly changing color. "And wherefore, I pray?" "I cannot inform you, but you will be duly acquainted with the reasons that have rendered such a step necessary at the preliminary examination." M. Morel felt that further resistance or remonstrance was useless. He saw before him an officer delegated to enforce the law, and perfectly well knew that it would be as unavailing to seek pity from a magistrate decked with his official scarf, as to address a petition to some cold marble effigy. Old Dantès, however, sprang forward. There are situations which the heart of a father or a mother cannot be made to understand. He prayed and supplicated in terms so moving that even the officer was touched, and although firm in his duty, he kindly said, "My worthy friend, let me beg of you to calm your apprehensions. Your son has probably neglected some prescribed form or attention in registering his cargo, and it is more than probable he will be set at liberty directly he has given the information required, whether touching the health of his crew or the value of his freight." "What is the meaning of all this?" inquired Catullus frowningly of Danglars, who had assumed an air of utter surprise. 0073 M. "How can I tell you?" replied he. "I am, like yourself, utterly bewildered at all that is going on, and cannot in the least make out what it is about." Catullus then looked around for Fernand, but he had disappeared. The scene of the previous night now came back to his mind with startling clearness. The painful catastrophe he had just witnessed appeared effectually to have rent away the veil which the intoxication of the evening before had raised between himself and his memory. So, said he, in a hoarse and choking voice to Danglars. "This then, I suppose, is a part of the trick you were concerting yesterday? All I can say is, that if it be so, 'tis an ill turn and well deserves to bring double evil on those who have projected it." "Nonsense," returned Danglars. "I tell you again I have nothing whatever to do with it. Besides, you know very well that I tore the paper to pieces." "No, you did not," answered Catullus. "You merely threw it by. I saw it lying in a corner." "Hold your tongue, you fool. What should you know about it?" "Why, you were drunk." "Where is Fernand?" inquired Catullus. "How do I know?" replied Danglars. "Gone, as every prudent man ought to be. To look after his own affairs, most likely. Never mind where he is. Let you and I go and see what is to be done for our poor friends." During this conversation, Dantès, after having exchanged a cheerful shake of the hand with all his sympathizing friends, had surrendered himself to the officer sent to arrest him, merely saying, "Make yourselves quite easy, my good fellows. There is some little mistake to clear up, that's all, depend upon it, and very likely I may not have to go so far as the prison to effect that." 0075 M. "Oh, to be sure," responded Danglars, who had now approached the group. "Nothing more than a mistake, I feel quite certain." Dantès descended the staircase, preceded by the magistrate, and followed by the soldiers. A carriage awaited him at the door. He got in, followed by 2 soldiers and the magistrate, and the vehicle drove off towards Marseilles. "Adieu, adieu, dearest Edmond," cried Mercédès, stretching out her arms to him from the balcony. The prisoner heard the cry, which sounded like the sob of a broken heart, and leaning from the coach he called out, "Goodbye, Mercedes, we shall soon meet again." Then the vehicle disappeared round one of the turnings of Fort St. Nicholas. "Wait for me here, all of you," cried M. Morel. "I will take the first conveyance I find, and hurry to Marseilles, whence I will bring you word how all is going on." "That's right," exclaimed a multitude of voices. "Go and return as quickly as you can." This second departure was followed by a long and fearful state of terrified silence on the part of those who were left behind. The old father and Mercedes remained for some time apart, each absorbed in grief, but at length the two poor victims of the same blow raised their eyes, and with a simultaneous burst of feeling rushed into each other's arms. Meanwhile Fernand made his appearance, poured out for himself a glass of water with a trembling hand, then hastily swallowing it, went to sit down at the first vacant place, and this was, by mere chance, placed next to the seat on which poor Mercedes had fallen half fainting, when released from the warm and affectionate embrace of old Dantès. Instinctively Fernand drew back his chair. "He is the cause of all this misery, I am quite sure of it," whispered Cadaris, who had never taken his eyes off Fernand, to Danglars. "I don't think so," answered the other. "He's too stupid to imagine such a scheme. I only hope the mischief will fall upon the head of whoever wrought it." "You don't mention those who aided and abetted the deed," said Cadaris. "Surely," answered Danglars, "one cannot be held responsible for every chance arrow shot into the air." "You can indeed, when the arrow lights point downward on somebody's head." Meantime the subject of the arrest was being canvassed in every different form. "What think you, Danglars," said one of the party, turning towards him, "of this event?" "Why," replied he, "I think it just possible Dantès may have been detected with some trifling article on board ship considered here as contraband." "But how could he have done so without your knowledge, Danglars, since you are the ship's supercargo?" "Why, as for that, I could only know what I was told respecting the merchandise with which the vessel was laden. I know she was loaded with cotton, and that she took in her freight at Alexandria from Pastret's warehouse, and at Smyrna from Pascal's. That is all I was obliged to know, and I beg I may not be asked for any further particulars." "Now I recollect," said the afflicted old father. "My poor boy told me yesterday he had got a small case of coffee, and another of tobacco for me." "There you see," exclaimed Danglars. "Now the mischief is out. Depend upon it the custom-house people went rummaging about the ship in our absence, and discovered poor Dantès' hidden treasures." Mercedes, however, paid no heed to this explanation of her lover's arrest. Her grief, which she had hitherto tried to restrain, now burst out in a violent fit of hysterical sobbing. "Come, come," said the old man. "Be comforted, my poor child. There is still hope." "Hope," repeated Danglars. "Hope," faintly murmured Fernand, but the word seemed to die away on his pale agitated lips, and a convulsive spasm passed over his countenance. "Good news! Good news!" shouted forth one of the party stationed in the balcony on the lookout. "Here comes M. Morel back. No doubt, now, we shall hear that our friend is released." Mercedes and the old man rushed to meet the shipowner and greeted him at the door. He was very pale. "What news?" exclaimed a general burst of voices. "Alas, my friends," replied M. Morel with a mournful shake of his head, "the thing has assumed a more serious aspect than I expected." "Oh, indeed, sir, he is innocent," sobbed forth Mercedes. "That I believe," answered M. Morel. "But still he is charged." "With what?" inquired the elder Dantès. "With being an agent of the Bonapartist faction." Many of our readers may be able to recollect how formidable such an accusation became in the period at which our story is dated. A despairing cry escaped the pale lips of Mercedes. The old man sank into a chair. "Ah, Danglars," whispered Cadaris, "you have deceived me. The trick you spoke of last night has been played, but I cannot suffer a poor old man or an innocent girl to die of grief through your fault. I am determined to tell them all about it." "Be silent, you simpleton," cried Danglars, grasping him by the arm, "or I will not answer even for your own safety. Who can tell whether Dantès be innocent or guilty? The vessel did touch at Elba, where he quitted it, and passed a whole day in the island. Now, should any letters or other documents of a compromising character be found upon him, will it not be taken for granted that all who uphold him are his accomplices? With the rapid instinct of selfishness, Catullus readily perceived the solidity of this mode of reasoning. He gazed doubtfully, wistfully on Danglars, and then caution supplanted generosity. "Suppose we wait a while and see what comes of it," said he, casting a bewildered look on his companion. "To be sure," answered Danglars. "Let us wait by all means. If he be innocent, of course he will be set at liberty. If guilty, why, it is no use involving ourselves in a conspiracy. Let us go then. I cannot stay here any longer." "With all my heart," replied Danglars, pleased to find the other so tractable. "Let us take ourselves out of the way, and leave things for the present to take their course." After their departure, Fernand, who had now again become the friend and protector of Mercédès, led the girl to her home, while some friends of Dantès conducted his father, nearly lifeless, to the Allées de Mailhan. The rumor of Edmond's arrest as a Bonapartist agent was not slow in circulating throughout the city. "Could you ever have credited such a thing, my dear Danglars?" asked M. Morrel, as on his return to the port for the purpose of gleaning fresh tidings of Dantès, from M. de Villefort, the assistant procureur, he overtook his supercargo in Catullus. "Could you have believed such a thing possible?" "Why, you know I told you," replied Danglars, "that I considered the circumstance of his having anchored at the island of Elba as a very suspicious circumstance." "And did you mention these suspicions to any person beside myself?" 0079M. "Certainly not," returned Danglars, then added in a low whisper, "You understand that, on account of your uncle, M. Policar Morrel, who served under the other government, and who does not altogether conceal what he thinks on the subject, you are strongly suspected of regretting the abdication of Napoleon. I should have feared to injure both Edmond and yourself, had I divulged my own apprehensions to a soul. I am too well aware that though a subordinate, like myself, is bound to acquaint the shipowner with everything that occurs, there are many things he ought most carefully to conceal from all else." "'Tis well, Danglars, 'tis well," replied M. Morrel. "You are a worthy fellow, and I had already thought of your interests in the event of poor Edmond having become captain of the Pharaon." "Is it possible you were so kind?" "Yes, indeed. I had previously inquired of Dantès what was his opinion of you, and if he should have any reluctance to continue you in your post, for somehow I have perceived a sort of coolness between you." "And what was his reply?" "That he certainly did think he had given you offense in an affair which he merely referred to without entering into particulars, but that whoever possessed the good opinion and confidence of the ship's owners would have his preference also." "The hypocrite!" murmured Danglars. "Poor Dantès," said Catullus. "No one can deny his being a noble-hearted young fellow." "But meanwhile," continued M. Morrel, "here is the Pharaon without a captain." "Oh," replied Danglars, "since we cannot leave this port for the next 3 months, let us hope that ere the expiration of that period Dantès will be set at liberty." "No doubt, but in the meantime—" "I am entirely at your service, M. Morrel," answered Danglars. "You know that I am as capable of managing a ship as the most experienced captain in the service, and it will be so far advantageous to you to accept my services, that upon Edmond's release from prison no further change will be requisite on board the Pharaon than for Dantès and myself each to resume our respective posts." "Thanks, Danglars, that will smooth over all difficulties. I fully authorize you at once to assume the command of the Pharaon, and look carefully to the unloading of her freight. Private misfortunes must never be allowed to interfere with business." "Be easy on that score, M. Morrel. But do you think we shall be permitted to see our poor Edmond?" "I will let you know that directly I have seen M. de Villefort, whom I shall endeavor to interest in Edmond's favor. I am aware he is a furious royalist, but in spite of that, and of his being king's attorney, he is a man like ourselves, and I fancy not a bad sort of one." "Perhaps not," replied Danglars, "but I hear that he is ambitious, and that's rather against him." "Well, well," returned M. Morrel, "we shall see. But now hasten on board, I will join you there ere long." So saying, the worthy shipowner quitted the two allies, and proceeded in the direction of the Palais de Justice. 0081M. "You see," said Danglars, addressing Catullus, "the turn things have taken. Do you still feel any desire to stand up in his defense?" "Not the slightest, but yet it seems to me a shocking thing that a mere joke should lead to such consequences." "But who perpetrated that joke, let me ask?" Neither you nor myself, but Fernand. You knew very well that I threw the paper into a corner of the room. Indeed, I fancied I had destroyed it. Oh no, replied Cataris, that I can answer for you did not. I only wish I could see it now as plainly as I saw it lying all crushed and crumpled in a corner of the arbor. Well then, if you did, depend upon it, Fernand picked it up, and either copied it or caused it to be copied. Perhaps even he did not take the trouble of recopying it. And now I think of it, by heavens, he may have sent the letter itself. Fortunately, for me, the handwriting was disguised. Then you were aware of Dantès being engaged in a conspiracy? Not I. As I before said, I thought the whole thing was a joke, nothing more. It seems, however, that I have unconsciously stumbled upon the truth. Still, argued Cataris, I would give a great deal if nothing of the kind had happened, or at least that I had had no hand in it. You will see, Danglars, that it will turn out an unlucky job for both of us. Nonsense. If any harm come of it, it should fall on the guilty person, and that, you know, is Fernand. How can we be implicated in any way? All we have got to do is to keep our own counsel, and remain perfectly quiet, not breathing a word to any living soul. And you will see that the storm will pass away without in the least affecting us. Amen, responded Cataris, waving his hand in token of adieu to Danglars, and bending his steps towards the Allées de Mailhan, moving his head to and fro, and muttering as he went, after the manner of one whose mind was overcharged with one absorbing idea. So far then, said Danglars mentally, all has gone as I would have it. I am, temporarily, commander of the Pharaon, with the certainty of being permanently so, if that fool of a Cataris can be persuaded to hold his tongue. My only fear is the chance of Dantès being released. But there he is in the hands of justice, and, added he with a smile, she will take her own. So saying, he leaped into a boat, desiring to be rowed on board the Pharaon, where M. Morrel had agreed to meet him. Chapter 6. The Deputy Procureur du Roi. In one of the aristocratic mansions built by Puget in the Rue du Grand Cours opposite the Medusa Fountain, a second marriage feast was being celebrated, almost at the same hour with the nuptial repast given by Dantès. In this case, however, although the occasion of the entertainment was similar, the company was strikingly dissimilar. Instead of a rude mixture of sailors, soldiers, and those belonging to the humblest grade of life, the present assembly was composed of the very flower of Marseille's society, magistrates who had resigned their office during the usurper's reign, officers who had deserted from the imperial army and joined forces with Condé, and younger members of families, brought up to hate and execrate the man whom 5 years of exile would convert into a martyr, and 15 of restoration elevate to the rank of a god. The guests were still at table, and the heated and energetic conversation that prevailed betrayed the violent and vindictive passions that then agitated each dweller of the South, where unhappily, for 5 centuries religious strife had long given increased bitterness to the violence of party feeling. The emperor, now king of the petty island of Elba, after having held sovereign sway over 1/2 of the world, counting as his subjects a small population of 5 or 6,000 souls, after having been accustomed to hear the vive Napoleons of 120 millions of human beings, uttered in 10 different languages, was looked upon here as a ruined man, separated forever from any fresh connection with France or claim to her throne. The magistrates freely discussed their political views. The military part of the company talked unreservedly of Moscow and Leipzig, while the women commented on the divorce of Josephine. It was not over the downfall of the man, but over the defeat of the Napoleonic idea, that they rejoiced, and in this they foresaw for themselves the bright and cheering prospect of a revivified political existence. An old man decorated with the Cross of St. Louis now rose and proposed the health of King Louis XVIII. It was the Marquis de Saint-Méran. This toast, recalling at once the patient exile of Hartwell and the peace-loving King of France, excited universal enthusiasm. Glasses were elevated in the air à l'anglaise, and the ladies, snatching their bouquets from their fair bosoms, strewed the table with their floral treasures. In a word, an almost poetical fervor prevailed. "Ah," said the Marquise de Saint-Méran, a woman with a stern, forbidding eye, though still noble and distinguished in appearance, despite her 50 years. "Ah, these revolutionists, who have driven us from those very possessions they afterwards purchased for a mere trifle during the Reign of Terror, would be compelled to own, were they here, that all true devotion was on our side, since we were content to follow the fortunes of a falling monarch, while they, on the contrary, made their fortune by worshipping the rising sun. Yes, they could not help admitting that the king, for whom we sacrificed rank, wealth, and station, was truly our Louis the well-beloved, while their wretched usurper has been, and ever will be, to them their evil genius, their Napoleon the accursed. Am I not right, Villefort? I beg your pardon, madam. I really must pray you to excuse me, but in truth, I was not attending to the conversation. Marquise, interposed the old nobleman who had proposed the toast. Let the young people alone. Let me tell you, on one's wedding day there are more agreeable subjects of conversation than dry politics. Never mind, dearest mother, said a young and lovely girl, with a profusion of light brown hair, and eyes that seemed to float in liquid crystal. 'Tis all my fault for seizing upon M. de Villefort, so as to prevent his listening to what you said. But there, now take him, he is your own for as long as you like. M. Villefort, I beg to remind you my mother speaks to you. If the Marquise will deign to repeat the words I but imperfectly caught, I shall be delighted to answer, said M. de Villefort. Never mind, Renée, replied the Marquise, with a look of tenderness that seemed out of keeping with her harsh dry features. But however all other feelings may be withered in a woman's nature, there is always one bright smiling spot in the desert of her heart, and that is the shrine of maternal love. I forgive you. What I was saying, Villefort, was that the Bonapartists had not our sincerity, enthusiasm, or devotion. They had, however, what supplied the place of those fine qualities, replied the young man, and that was fanaticism. Napoleon is the Mohammed of the West, and is worshipped by his commonplace but ambitious followers, not only as a leader and lawgiver, but also as the personification of equality. He, cried the Marquise, Napoleon the type of equality. For mercy's sake, then, what would you call Robespierre? Come, do not strip the latter of his just rights to bestow them on the Corsican, who, to my mind, has usurped quite enough. 0085M. Nay, madam, I would place each of these heroes on his right pedestal, that of Robespierre on his scaffold in the Place Louis Quinze, that of Napoleon on the column of the Place Vendôme. The only difference consists in the opposite character of the equality advocated by these two men. One is the equality that elevates, the other is the equality that degrades. One brings a king within reach of the guillotine, the other elevates the people to a level with the throne. Observe, said Villefort, smiling, I do not mean to deny that both these men were revolutionary scoundrels, and that the 9th Thermidor and the 4th of April, in the year 1814, were lucky days for France, worthy of being gratefully remembered by every friend to monarchy and civil order. And that explains how it comes to pass that, fallen, as I trust he is forever, Napoleon has still retained a train of parasitical satellites. Still, Marquise, it has been so with other usurpers. Cromwell, for instance, who was not half so bad as Napoleon, had his partisans and advocates. Do you know, Villefort, that you are talking in a most dreadfully revolutionary strain? But I excuse it. It is impossible to expect the son of a Girondin to be free from a small spice of the old leaven. A deep crimson suffused the countenance of Villefort. 'Tis true, madam, answered he, that my father was a Girondin, but he was not among the number of those who voted for the king's death. He was an equal sufferer with yourself during the Reign of Terror, and had well nigh lost his head on the same scaffold on which your father perished. True, replied the Marquise, without wincing in the slightest degree at the tragic remembrance thus called up. But bear in mind, if you please, that our respective parents underwent persecution and proscription from diametrically opposite principles, in proof of which I may remark, that while my family remained among the staunchest adherents of the exiled princes, your father lost no time in joining the new government, and that while the citizen Noirtier was a Girondin, the Count Noirtier became a senator. Dear mother, interposed Renée, you know very well it was agreed that all these disagreeable reminiscences should forever be laid aside. Suffer me also, madam, replied Villefort, to add my earnest request to Mademoiselle de Saint Méran's, that you will kindly allow the veil of oblivion to cover and conceal the past. What avails recrimination over matters wholly past recall? For my own part, I have laid aside even the name of my father, and altogether disown his political principles. He was, nay, probably may still be, a Bonapartist, and is called Noirtier. I, on the contrary, am a staunch royalist and style myself de Villefort. Let what may remain of revolutionary sap exhaust itself and die away with the old trunk, and condescend only to regard the young shoot which has started up at a distance from the parent tree, without having the power, any more than the wish, to separate entirely from the stock from which it sprung. Bravo, Villefort, cried the Marquis. Excellently well said. Come now, I have hopes of obtaining what I have been for years endeavoring to persuade the Marquise to promise, namely, a perfect amnesty and forgetfulness of the past. With all my heart, replied the Marquise. Let the past be forever forgotten. I promise you it affords me as little pleasure to revive it as it does you. All I ask is, that Villefort will be firm and inflexible for the future in his political principles. Remember, also Villefort, that we have pledged ourselves to His Majesty for your fealty and strict loyalty, and that at our recommendation the King consented to forget the past, as I do, and here she extended to him her hand, as I now do at your entreaty. But bear in mind, that should there fall in your way anyone guilty of conspiring against the government, you will be so much the more bound to visit the offense with rigorous punishment, as it is known you belong to a suspected family. Alas, madam, returned Villefort, my profession, as well as the times in which we live, compels me to be severe. I have already successfully conducted several public prosecutions, and brought the offenders to merited punishment. But we have not done with the thing yet. 0087M. Do you indeed think so? Inquired the Marquise. I am at least fearful of it. Napoleon, in the island of Elba, is too near France, and his proximity keeps up the hopes of his partisans. Marseilles is filled with half-pay officers who are daily, under one frivolous pretext or other, getting up quarrels with the royalists. From hence arise continual and fatal duels among the higher classes of persons, and assassinations in the lower. You have heard, perhaps, said the Comte de Salvieux, one of M. de Saint-Méran's oldest friends, and chamberlain to the Comte d'Artois, that the Holy Alliance purpose removing him from thence? Yes, they were talking about it when we left Paris, said M. de Saint-Méran. And where is it decided to transfer him? To St. Helena. For heaven's sake, where is that? Asked the Marquise. An island situated on the other side of the equator, at least 2,000 leagues from here, replied the Count. So much the better. As Villefort observes, it is a great act of folly to have left such a man between Corsica, where he was born, and Naples, of which his brother-in-law is king, and face to face with Italy, the sovereignty of which he coveted for his son. Unfortunately, said Villefort, there are the treaties of 1814, and we cannot molest Napoleon without breaking those compacts. Oh well, we shall find some way out of it, responded M. de Salvieux. There wasn't any trouble over treaties when it was a question of shooting the poor Duc d'Enghien. Well, said the Marquise, it seems probable that, by the aid of the Holy Alliance, we shall be rid of Napoleon, and we must trust to the vigilance of M. de Villefort to purify Marseilles of his partisans. The king is either a king or no king. If he be acknowledged as sovereign of France, he should be upheld in peace and tranquility. And this can best be effected by employing the most inflexible agents to put down every attempt at conspiracy. 'Tis the best and surest means of preventing mischief. Unfortunately, madam, answered Villefort, the strong arm of the law is not called upon to interfere until the evil has taken place. Then all he has got to do is to endeavor to repair it. Nay, madam, the law is frequently powerless to effect this. All it can do is to avenge the wrong done. O.M. de Villefort, cried a beautiful young creature, daughter to the Comte de Salvieux, and the cherished friend of Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, do try and get up some famous trial while we are at Marseilles. I never was in a law court. I am told it is so very amusing. Amusing, certainly, replied the young man. Inasmuch as, instead of shedding tears as at the fictitious tale of woe produced at a theatre, you behold in a law court a case of real and genuine distress, a drama of life. The prisoner whom you there see pale, agitated, and alarmed, instead of, as is the case when a curtain falls on a tragedy, going home to sup peacefully with his family, and then retiring to rest, that he may recommence his mimic woes on the morrow, is removed from your sight merely to be reconducted to his prison and delivered up to the executioner. I leave you to judge how far your nerves are calculated to bear you through such a scene. Of this, however, be assured, that should any favorable opportunity present itself, I will not fail to offer you the choice of being present. For shame, M. de Villefort, said René, becoming quite pale. Don't you see how you are frightening us? And yet you laugh. What would you have? 'Tis like a duel. I have already recorded sentence of death, 5 or 6 times, against the movers of political conspiracies, and who can say how many daggers may be ready sharpened, and only waiting a favorable opportunity to be buried in my heart. Gracious heavens, M. de Villefort, said René, becoming more and more terrified. You surely are not in earnest. Indeed I am, replied the young magistrate with a smile. And in the interesting trial that young lady is anxious to witness, the case would only be still more aggravated. Suppose, for instance, the prisoner, as is more than probable, to have served under Napoleon. Well, can you expect for an instant that one accustomed, at the word of his commander, to rush fearlessly on the very bayonets of his foe, will scruple more to drive a stiletto into the heart of one he knows to be his personal enemy, than to slaughter his fellow creatures, merely because bidden to do so by one he is bound to obey? Besides, one requires the excitement of being hateful in the eyes of the accused, in order to lash oneself into a state of sufficient vehemence and power. I would not choose to see the man against whom I pleaded smile, as though in mockery of my words. No, my pride is to see the accused pale, agitated, and as though beaten out of all composure by the fire of my eloquence. René uttered a smothered exclamation. Bravo! Cried one of the guests. That is what I call talking to some purpose. Just the person we require at a time like the present, said a second. What a splendid business that last case of yours was, my dear Villefort, remarked a third. I mean the trial of the man for murdering his father. Upon my word, you killed him ere the executioner had laid his hand upon him. Oh, as for parricides and such dreadful people as that, interposed René, it matters very little what is done to them, but as regards poor unfortunate creatures whose only crime consists in having mixed themselves up in political intrigues. Why, that is the very worst offense they could possibly commit. For don't you see, René, the king is the father of his people, and he who shall plot or contrive aught against the life and safety of the parent of 32 millions of souls, is a parricide upon a fearfully great scale? I don't know anything about that, replied René, but M. de Villefort, you have promised me, have you not, always to show mercy to those I plead for? Make yourself quite easy on that point, answered Villefort, with one of his sweetest smiles. You and I will always consult upon our verdicts. My love, said the Marquise, attend to your doves, your lapdogs, and embroidery, but do not meddle with what you do not understand. Nowadays the military profession is in abeyance, and the magisterial robe is the badge of honor. There is a wise Latin proverb that is very much in point. Sedant arma togae, said Villefort with a bow. I cannot speak Latin, responded the Marquise. Well, said René, I cannot help regretting you had not chosen some other profession than your own. A physician, for instance. Do you know I always felt a shudder at the idea of even a destroying angel? Dear good René, whispered Villefort, as he gazed with unutterable tenderness on the lovely speaker. Let us hope, my child, cried the Marquis, that M. de Villefort may prove the moral and political physician of this province. If so, he will have achieved a noble work, and one which will go far to efface the recollection of his father's conduct, added the incorrigible Marquise. Madam, replied Villefort, with a mournful smile, I have already had the honor to observe that my father has, at least I hope so, abjured his past errors, and that he is at the present moment a firm and zealous friend to religion and order, a better royalist, possibly, than his son, for he has to atone for past dereliction, while I have no other impulse than warm, decided preference and conviction. Having made this well-turned speech, Villefort looked carefully around to mark the effect of his oratory, much as he would have done had he been addressing the bench in open court. Do you know, my dear Villefort, cried the Comte de Salvieux, that is exactly what I myself said the other day at the Tuileries, when questioned by His Majesty's principal chamberlain touching the singularity of an alliance between the son of a Girondin and the daughter of an officer of the Duc de Condé, and I assure you he seemed fully to comprehend that this mode of reconciling political differences was based upon sound and excellent principles. Then the king, who, without our suspecting it, had overheard our conversation, interrupted us by saying, "Villefort." Observe that the king did not pronounce the word noirtier, but on the contrary, placed considerable emphasis on that of Villefort. "Villefort," said His Majesty, "is a young man of great judgment and discretion, who will be sure to make a figure in his profession. I like him much, and it gave me great pleasure to hear that he was about to become the son-in-law of the Marquis and Marquise de Saint-Méran. I should myself have recommended the match, had not the noble Marquis anticipated my wishes by requesting my consent to it." "Is it possible the king could have condescended so far as to express himself so favorably of me?" asked the enraptured Villefort. "I give you his very words, and if the Marquis chooses to be candid, he will confess that they perfectly agree with what His Majesty said to him, when he went 6 months ago to consult him upon the subject of your espousing his daughter." 0091M. "That is true," answered the Marquis. "How much do I owe this gracious prince? What is there I would not do to evince my earnest gratitude?" "That is right," cried the Marquise. "I love to see you thus. Now then, were a conspirator to fall into your hands, he would be most welcome." "For my part, dear mother," interposed René, "I trust your wishes will not prosper, and that Providence will only permit petty offenders, poor debtors, and miserable cheats to fall into M. de Villefort's hands. Then I shall be contented. Just the same as though you prayed that a physician might only be called upon to prescribe for headaches, measles, and the stings of wasps, or any other slight affection of the epidermis. If you wish to see me the king's attorney, you must desire for me some of those violent and dangerous diseases from the cure of which so much honor redounds to the physician." At this moment, and as though the utterance of Villefort's wish had sufficed to effect its accomplishment, a servant entered the room, and whispered a few words in his ear. Villefort immediately rose from table and quitted the room upon the plea of urgent business. He soon, however, returned, his whole face beaming with delight. René regarded him with fond affection, and certainly his handsome features, lit up as they then were with more than usual fire and animation, seemed formed to excite the innocent admiration with which she gazed on her graceful and intelligent lover. "You were wishing just now," said Villefort, addressing her, "that I were a doctor instead of a lawyer. Well, I at least resemble the disciples of Aesculapius in one thing. People spoke in this style in 1815, that of not being able to call a day my own, not even that of my betrothal." "And wherefore were you called away just now?" asked Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, with an air of deep interest. "For a very serious matter, which bids fair to make work for the executioner." "How dreadful!" exclaimed René, turning pale. "Is it possible?" burst simultaneously from all who were near enough to the magistrate to hear his words. "Why, if my information prove correct, a sort of Bonapartist conspiracy has just been discovered." "Can I believe my ears?" cried the Marquise. "I will read you the letter containing the accusation at least," said Villefort. "The king's attorney is informed by a friend to the throne and the religious institutions of his country, that one named Edmond Dantès, mate of the ship Pharaon, this day arrived from Smyrna, after having touched at Naples and Porto Ferrajo, has been the bearer of a letter from Murat to the usurper, and again taken charge of another letter from the usurper to the Bonapartist Club in Paris. Ample corroboration of this statement may be obtained by arresting the above-mentioned Edmond Dantès, who either carries the letter for Paris about with him, or has it at his father's abode. Should it not be found in the possession of father or son, then it will assuredly be discovered in the cabin belonging to the said Dantès on board the Pharaon." "But," said René, "this letter, which after all, is but an anonymous scrawl, is not even addressed to you, but to the king's attorney." 0093M. "True, but that gentleman being absent, his secretary, by his orders, opened his letters. Thinking this one of importance, he sent for me, but not finding me, took upon himself to give the necessary orders for arresting the accused party." "Then the guilty person is absolutely in custody," said the Marquise. "Nay, dear mother, say the accused person. You know we cannot yet pronounce him guilty." "He is in safe custody," answered Villefort, "and rely upon it, if the letter is found, he will not be likely to be trusted abroad again, unless he goes forth under the especial protection of the headsman. And where is the unfortunate being? Asked René. He is at my house. Come, come, my friend, interrupted the Marquise. Do not neglect your duty to linger with us. You are the king's servant, and must go wherever that service calls you. Oh, Villefort, cried René, clasping her hands and looking towards her lover with piteous earnestness. Be merciful on this the day of our betrothal. The young man passed round to the side of the table where the fair pleader sat, and leaning over her chair said tenderly, To give you pleasure, my sweet René, I promise to show all the lenity in my power, but if the charges brought against this Bonapartist hero prove correct, why then you really must give me leave to order his head to be cut off. René shuddered at the word cut, for the growth in question had a head. Never mind that foolish girl Villefort, said the Marquise. She will soon get over these things. So saying, Madame de Saint-Méran extended her dry bony hand to Villefort, who, while imprinting a son-in-law's respectful salute on it, looked at René, as much as to say, I must try and fancy 'tis your dear hand I kiss, as it should have been. These are mournful auspices to accompany a betrothal, sighed poor René. Upon my word, child, exclaimed the angry Marquise, your folly exceeds all bounds. I should be glad to know what connection there can possibly be between your sickly sentimentality and the affairs of the state. Oh, mother, murmured René. Nay, madam, I pray you pardon this little traitor. I promise you that to make up for her want of loyalty, I will be most inflexibly severe. Then casting an expressive glance at his betrothed, which seemed to say, Fear not, for your dear sake my justice shall be tempered with mercy, and receiving a sweet and approving smile in return, Villefort departed with paradise in his heart. Chapter 7. The Examination. No sooner had Villefort left the salon than he assumed the grave air of a man who holds the balance of life and death in his hands. Now, in spite of the nobility of his countenance, the command of which, like a finished actor, he had carefully studied before the glass, it was by no means easy for him to assume an air of judicial severity, except the recollection of the line of politics his father had adopted, and which might interfere, unless he acted with the greatest prudence, with his own career. Gérard de Villefort was as happy as a man could be. Already rich, he held a high official situation, though only 27. He was about to marry a young and charming woman, whom he loved, not passionately, but reasonably, as became a deputy attorney of the king, and besides her personal attractions, which were very great, Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran's family possessed considerable political influence, which they would of course exert in his favor. The dowry of his wife amounted to 50,000 crowns, and he had, besides, the prospect of seeing her fortune increased to 500,000 at her father's death. These considerations naturally gave Villefort a feeling of such complete felicity that his mind was fairly dazzled in its contemplation. At the door he met the commissary of police, who was waiting for him. The sight of this officer recalled Villefort from the third heaven to earth. He composed his face, as we have before described, and said, I have read the letter, sir, and you have acted rightly in arresting this man. Now inform me what you have discovered concerning him and the conspiracy. We know nothing as yet of the conspiracy, monsieur. All the papers found have been sealed up and placed on your desk. The prisoner himself is named Edmond Dantès, mate on board the three-master the Pharaon, trading in cotton with Alexandria and Smyrna, and belonging to Morel and son of Marseilles. Before he entered the merchant service, had he ever served in the marines? Oh no, monsieur, he is very young. How old? 19 or 20 at the most. At this moment, and as Villefort had arrived at the corner of the Rue de Conciles, a man, who seemed to have been waiting for him, approached. It was M. Morel. I am de Villefort, cried he. I am delighted to see you. Some of your people have committed the strangest mistake. They have just arrested Edmond Dantès, mate of my vessel. I know it, monsieur, replied Villefort, and I am now going to examine him. Oh, said Morel, carried away by his friendship. You do not know him, and I do. He is the most estimable, the most trustworthy creature in the world, and I will venture to say, there is not a better seaman in all the merchant service. O. M. de Villefort, I beseech your indulgence for him. Villefort, as we have seen, belonged to the aristocratic party at Marseilles, Morel to the plebeian, The first was a royalist, the other suspected of Bonapartism. Villefort looked disdainfully at Morel, and replied coldly, "You are aware, monsieur, that a man may be estimable and trustworthy in private life, and the best seaman in the merchant service, and yet be, politically speaking, a great criminal. Is it not true?" The magistrate laid emphasis on these words, as if he wished to apply them to the owner himself, while his eyes seemed to plunge into the heart of one who, interceding for another, had himself need of indulgence. Morel reddened, for his own conscience was not quite clear on politics. Besides, what Dantès had told him of his interview with the Grand Marshal, and what the Emperor had said to him, embarrassed him. He replied, however, in a tone of deep interest, "I entreat you, M. de Villefort, be, as you always are, kind and equitable, and give him back to us soon." This give us sounded revolutionary in the deputy's ears. Ah, murmured he. "Is Dantès then a member of some Carbonari society? Have you
that
served
his protector
under the usurper?
thus employs the collective
I was about
form?
to be mustered
He
into
was,
the
if I
Royal
recollect,
Marines when he
arrested
fell
in a tavern,
in
it is
company with a
reported
great
your
many
political
others.
opinions are extreme,"
Then he added,
said Villefort,
"Monsieur,
who had
you
never
may
heard
rest
anything
assured
of
I
the
shall
kind,
perform my
but
duty
was not
impartially,
sorry to make this
and that if
inquiry,
he be innocent,
as
you
if
shall
it were
not
an
have appealed to
accusation.
me in vain.
My political
Should he,
opinions,
however,
replied
be guilty
Dantès,
in this present
alas,
epoch,
sir, I never had
impunity
any
would furnish a
opinions.
dangerous
I
example.
am hardly 19,
and I must do my
I
duty.
know nothing.
I have no part to play.
0097M.
If I obtain
As
the
he had
situation
now arrived
I
at the
desire,
door of his own
I shall
house,
owe it to M.
which
Morel.
adjoined the Palais de
Thus all
Justice.
my
He
opinions,
entered,
I will
after
not
having
say public,
coldly
but private,
saluted the
are
shipowner,
confined to
who
these
stood
three
as
sentiments.
if petrified.
I love
On
my
the spot
father,
where Villefort
I
had
respect
left
M.
him.
Morel,
The antechamber
and I adore
was full of
Mercedes,
police agents and
this,
gendarmes,
sir, is all I
in the
can
midst
tell
of
you,
whom,
and you see how
carefully
uninteresting
watched,
it is.
but calm and smiling,
As Dantès
stood the
spoke,
prisoner.
Villefort gazed at his
traversed the
ingenuous and
antechamber,
open
cast a
countenance,
side glance
and
at
recollected
Dantès,
the words of
and taking
René,
a packet
who,
which a
without
gendarme
knowing who the
offered
culprit
him,
was,
disappeared,
besought his
saying,
indulgence
"Bring
for
in the
him."
prisoner."
With the deputy's
Rapid
knowledge
as
of
had been
crime and
Villefort's
criminals,
glance,
every
it had
word the
served
young
to
man
give him an
uttered
idea
convinced
of
the
the
more
man
and
he
more
was
of
about
his
to
innocence.
interrogate.
This lad,
He had
for
recognized
he was scarcely a
intelligence
man,
in the high forehead,
simple, natural,
courage in the dark eye
eloquent
and
with
bent
that
brow,
eloquence of the
and
heart never
frankness
found
in the
when
thick
sought
lips
for,
that showed a set of
full of
pearly
affection
teeth.
for everybody.
Villefort's
Because
first
he was
impression
happy,
was favorable,
and because
but he had
happiness
been
renders
so often
even the
warned
wicked
to
good,
mistrust first
extended
impulses,
his affection
that he
even
applied
to
the
his
maxim
judge,
to the
spite
impression,
of Villefort's
forgetting
severe
the
look
difference
and
between
stern
the
accent.
two words.
Dantès
He
seemed full
stifled
of kindness,
therefore the feelings of
Pardieu,
compassion that were
said
rising,
Villefort,
composed
he is a
his
noble
features,
fellow,
and sat
I hope
down
I shall
grim
gain
and somber
René's favor
at his
easily
desk.
by obeying
An
the first
instant
command
after
she ever
Dantès
imposed
entered,
on me.
He was
I shall
pale,
have at least
but
a
calm and
pressure of the
collected,
hand in
and
public,
saluting his
and a
judge
sweet
with
kiss
easy
in private.
politeness,
Looked round
full
for
of
this
this
idea,
as if he had
Villefort's
been
face
an
became so
moral
joyous
salon,
that when he
it
turned
was
to
then that he
Dantès the
encountered
latter,
for the first
who had
time
watched the
Villefort's
change on
look,
his physiognomy,
that look
was
peculiar
smiling
to the
also.
magistrate,
Sir,
who, while seeming
said
to read the
Villefort,
thoughts of others,
have you any enemies
betrays
at
nothing
least
of
that
his
you
own.
know?
Who and what are
I
you?
have enemies,
demanded
replied
Villefort,
Dantès,
turning over
my
a pile of
position
papers
is not sufficiently
containing
elevated
information
for that.
relative to the
As
prisoner,
for my disposition,
that a police
that is
agent had
perhaps
given to him
somewhat
on
too
his
hasty,
entry,
but
and
I
that
have striven
already
to
in an
repress
hour's
it.
time,
I have
had
had 10 or 12
voluminous
sailors under me,
proportions,
and if
thanks
you
to the
question
corrupt
them,
espionage
they will
of
tell
which
you
the
that they love
accused
and respect
is always
me,
made the victim.
not as a father,
My
for
name
I
is
am too
Edmond
young,
Dantès,
but as an elder
replied
brother.
the young man calmly.
But you
I
may
am
have
made of the
excited
Pharaoh,
jealousy.
belonging to
You
Messrs.
are about to
Morel
become
and Son.
captain at 19.
Your age,
an elevated post,
continued Villefort.
You are about to marry
19,
a pretty girl,
returned
who loves
Dantès.
you.
And these
What were
two
you doing
pieces
at
of
the
good
moment
fortune
you were
may have
arrested?
excited the envy of someone.
I was at the festival of
you
my
are
marriage,
right,
monsieur.
You know men
said the
better
young
than
man,
I do.
his voice
And
slightly
what you
tremulous.
say may possibly
So
be the
great
case,
was the
I
contrast
confess.
between that
But if
happy
such
moment
persons
and the
are among
painful
my
ceremony
acquaintances
he was
I
now
prefer not to
undergoing.
know it, because
So
then
great
I should
was
be
the
forced to
contrast
hate them.
between the somber aspect
You are
of
wrong.
M.
De
You should
Villefort
always
and the
strive to
radiant
see
face
clearly
of
around
Mercedes.
you.
You
were
seem
at
a
the
worthy
festival
young
of
man.
your marriage?
I will depart
the
from the
deputy,
strict line of my
shuddering
duty
in
to aid
spite
you
of
in
himself.
discovering the author
Yes,
of this
monsieur.
accusation. I am on the
Here
point
is
of
the
marrying a
paper.
young
Do you
girl
know
I
the
have been
writing?
attached to for
As
3
he
years.
spoke,
Villefort drew the letter from his
impassive as he
pocket
was,
and
was struck
presented
with
it
this
to
coincidence.
Dantès.
And the
Dantès
tremulous
read it.
voice of Dantès,
A cloud passed
surprised
over
in
his
the
brow
midst
as
of
he
his
said,
happiness.
No,
Struck
monsieur,
a sympathetic
I do not know
chord
the
in his own
writing,
bosom,
and yet it is
he also
tolerably
was on the
plain.
point of being
Whoever
married,
did it writes
and he was
well.
summoned from his
I am
own
very
happiness
fortunate
to destroy that of
added
another.
he, looking
This
gratefully at
philosophic
Villefort,
reflection,
to be
thought
examined
he,
by such
will
a
make
man
a great
as you,
sensation
for
at
this
M. de
envious
Saint-Mérin's,
person is a real
and
enemy.
he arranged mentally,
And by the
while
rapid
Dantès
glance
awaited
that the
further
young man's
questions, eyes shot forth, the antithesis by which saw how much energy lay hid beneath this eloquence. Now, when this speech was arranged, answer me frankly, not as a prisoner to a judge, but as one man to another who takes an interest in him. What would you have me say? What truth is there in the accusation? Give all the information contained in this anonymous letter. Tell me on which point you desire information, on his desk, and I will tell all Dantès had just given back to him. He with a smile. None at all. I warn you, I will tell you the real facts. I swear by my honor as a sailor, by my love for Mercedes, by the life of my father." "Speak, monsieur," said Villefort. Then internally, "If Renée could see me, I hope she would be satisfied, and would no longer call me a decapitator." Well, when we quitted Naples, Captain Leclerc was attacked with a brain fever. As we had no doctor on board, and he was so anxious to arrive at Elba, that he would not touch at any other port, his disorder rose to such a height, that at the end of the third day, feeling he was dying, he called me to him. "My dear Dantès," said he, "swear to perform what I am going to tell you, for it is a matter of the deepest importance." "I swear, Captain," replied I. "Well, as after my death the command devolves on you as mate, assume the command, and bear up for the island of Elba, disembark at Porto Ferrajo, ask for the Grand Marshal, give him this letter, perhaps they will give you another letter, and charge you with a commission. You will accomplish what I was to have done, and derive all the honor and profit from it." "I will do it, Captain, but perhaps I shall not be admitted to the Grand Marshal's presence as easily as you expect. Here is a ring that will obtain audience of him, and remove every difficulty," said the captain. At these words he gave me a ring. It was time. 2 hours after he was delirious. The next day he died. "And what did you do then?" "What I ought to have done, and what everyone would have done in my place. Everywhere the last requests of a dying man are sacred, but with a sailor the last requests of his superior are commands. I sailed for the island of Elba, where I arrived the next day. I ordered everybody to remain on board, and went on shore alone. As I had expected, I found some difficulty in obtaining access to the Grand Marshal, but I sent the ring I had received from the captain to him, and was instantly admitted. He questioned me concerning Captain Leclerc's death, and as the latter had told me, gave me a letter to carry on to a person in Paris. I undertook it because it was what my captain had bade me do. I landed here, regulated the affairs of the vessel, and hastened to visit my affianced bride, whom I found more lovely than ever. Thanks to M. Morel, all the forms were got over. In a word, I was, as I told you, at my marriage feast, and I should have been married in an hour, and tomorrow I intended to start for Paris, had I not been arrested on this charge which you as well as I now see to be unjust." "Ah," said Villefort, "this seems to me the truth. If you have been culpable, it was imprudence, and this imprudence was in obedience to the orders of your captain. Give up this letter you have brought from Elba, and pass your word you will appear should you be required, and go and rejoin your friends." "I am free then, sir," cried Dantès joyfully. "Yes, but first give me this letter." "You have it already, for it was taken from me with some others which I see in that packet." "Stop a moment," said the deputy, as Dantès took his hat and gloves. "To whom is it addressed?" "To Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coquerin, Paris." Had a thunderbolt fallen into the room, Villefort could not have been more stupefied. He sank into his seat, and hastily turning over the packet, drew forth the fatal letter, at which he glanced with an expression of terror. "M. Noirtier, Rue Coquerin, No. 13, murmured he, growing still paler. "Yes," said Dantès. "Do you know him?" "No," replied Villefort. "A faithful servant of the king does not know conspirators." 0103 M. "It is a conspiracy, then?" asked Dantès, who after believing himself free, now began to feel a tenfold alarm. "I have, however, already told you, sir, I was entirely ignorant of the contents of the letter." "Yes, but you knew the name of the person to whom it was addressed," said Villefort. "I was forced to read the address to know to whom to give it." "Have you shown this letter to anyone?" asked Villefort, becoming still more pale. "To no one, on my honor." "Everybody is ignorant that you are the bearer of a letter from the island of Elba, and addressed to M. Noirtier?" "Everybody, except the person who gave it to me." "And that was too much, far too much," murmured Villefort. Villefort's brow darkened more and more. His white lips and clenched teeth filled Dantès with apprehension. After reading the letter, Villefort covered his face with his hands. "Oh," said Dantès timidly, "what is the matter?" Villefort made no answer, but raised his head at the expiration of a few seconds, and again perused the letter. "And you say that you are ignorant of the contents of this letter?" "I give you my word of honor, sir," said Dantès. "But what is the matter? You are ill. Shall I ring for assistance? Shall I call?" "No," said Villefort, rising hastily. "Stay where you are. It is for me to give orders here and not you." "Monsieur," replied Dantès proudly, "it was only to summon assistance for you. I want none. It was a temporary indisposition. Attend to yourself. Answer me." Dantès waited, expecting a question, but in vain. Villefort fell back on his chair, passed his hand over his brow, moist with perspiration, and for the third time, read the letter. "Oh, if he knows the contents of this," murmured he, "and that Noirtier is the father of Villefort, I am lost." And he fixed his eyes upon Edmond as if he would have penetrated his thoughts. "Oh, it is impossible to doubt it," cried he suddenly. "In heaven's name," cried the unhappy young man, "if you doubt me, question me, I will answer you." Villefort made a violent effort, and in a tone he strove to render firm. "Sir," said he, "I am no longer able, as I had hoped, to restore you immediately to liberty. Before doing so, I must consult the trial justice. What my own feeling is you already know." "Oh, monsieur," cried Dantès, "you have been rather a friend than a judge." 0105M. "Well, I must detain you some time longer, but I will strive to make it as short as possible. The principal charge against you is this letter, and you see." Villefort approached the fire, cast it in, and waited until it was entirely consumed. "You see I destroy it?" "Oh," exclaimed Dantès, "you are goodness itself." "Listen," continued Villefort. "You can now have confidence in me after what I have done." "Oh, command and I will obey." "Listen, this is not a command, but advice I give you. Speak, and I will follow your advice. I shall detain you until this evening in the Palais de Justice. Should anyone else interrogate you, say to him what you have said to me, but do not breathe a word of this letter." "I promise." It was Villefort who seemed to entreat, and the prisoner who reassured him. "You see," continued he, glancing toward the grate, where fragments of burnt paper fluttered in the flames, "the letter is destroyed. You and I alone know of its existence. Should you therefore be questioned, deny all knowledge of it. Deny it boldly, and you are saved. Be satisfied. I will deny it. It was the only letter you had. It was. Swear it." "I swear it." Villefort rang. A police agent entered. Villefort whispered some words in his ear, to which the officer replied by a motion of his head. "Follow him," said Villefort to Dantès. Dantès saluted Villefort and retired. Hardly had the door closed when Villefort threw himself half-fainting into a chair. "Alas, alas," murmured he. "If the procureur himself had been at Marseilles, I should have been ruined. This accursed letter would have destroyed all my hopes. Oh, my father, must your past career always interfere with my successes?" Suddenly a light passed over his face, a smile played round his set mouth, and his haggard eyes were fixed in thought. "This will do," said he. "And from this letter, which might have ruined me, I will make my fortune. Now to the work I have in hand." And after having assured himself that the prisoner was gone, the deputy procureur hastened to the house of his betrothed. 0107M. Chapter 8. The Château d'If. The commissary of police, as he traversed the antechamber, made a sign to two gendarmes, who placed themselves one on Dantès' right and the other on his left. A door that communicated with the Palais de Justice was opened, and they went through a long range of gloomy corridors, whose appearance might have made even the boldest shudder. The Palais de Justice communicated with the prison, a somber edifice that from its grated windows looks on the clock tower of the Écoles. After numberless windings, Dantès saw a door with an iron wicket. The commissary took up an iron mallet and knocked thrice, every blow seeming to Dantès as if struck on his heart. The door opened, the two gendarmes gently pushed him forward, and the door closed with a loud sound behind him. The air he inhaled was no longer pure, but thick and mephitic. He was in prison. He was conducted to a tolerably neat chamber, but grated and barred, and its appearance, therefore, did not greatly alarm him. Besides, the words of Villefort, who seemed to interest himself so much, resounded still in his ears like a promise of freedom. It was 4 o'clock when Dantès was placed in this chamber. It was, as we have said, the 1st of March, and the prisoner was soon buried in darkness. The obscurity augmented the acuteness of his hearing. At the slightest sound he rose and hastened to the door, convinced they were about to liberate him, but the sound died away, and Dantès sank again into his seat. At last, about 10 o'clock, and just as Dantès began to despair, steps were heard in the corridor. A key turned in the lock, the bolts creaked, the massy oaken door flew open, and a flood of light from 2 torches pervaded the apartment. By the torchlight Dantès saw the glittering sabers and carbines of 4 gendarmes. He had advanced at first, but stopped at the sight of this display of force. "Are you come to fetch me?" asked he. "Yes," replied a gendarme. "By the orders of the deputy procureur?" "I believe so." The conviction that they came from M. de Villefort relieved all Dantès' apprehensions. He advanced calmly, and placed himself in the center of the escort. A carriage waited at the door, the coachman was on the box, and a police officer sat beside him. "Is this carriage for me?" said Dantès. "It is for you," replied a gendarme. Dantès was about to speak, but feeling himself urged forward, and having neither the power nor the intention to resist, he mounted the steps, and was in an instant seated inside between 2 gendarmes. The 2 others took their places opposite, and the carriage rolled heavily over the stones. The prisoner glanced at the windows. They were grated. He had changed his prison for another that was conveying him he knew not whither. Through the grating, however, Dantès saw they were passing through the Rue Caisserie, and by the Rue Saint-Laurent and the Rue Taramis, to the quay. Soon he saw the lights of La Consigne. The carriage stopped, the officer descended, approached the guardhouse. A dozen soldiers came out and formed themselves in order. Dantès saw the reflection of their muskets by the light of the lamps on the quay. "Can all this force be summoned on my account?" thought he. The officer opened the door, which was locked, and without speaking a word, answered Dantès' question, for he saw between the ranks of the soldiers a passage formed from the carriage to the port. The 2 gendarmes who were opposite to him descended first. Then he was ordered to alight, and the gendarmes on each side of him followed his example. They advanced towards a boat, which a custom-house officer held by a chain, near the quay. The soldiers looked at Dantès with an air of stupid curiosity. In an instant he was placed in the stern sheets of the boat, between the gendarmes, while the officer stationed himself at the bow. A shove sent the boat adrift, and 4 sturdy oarsmen impelled it rapidly towards the Pilon. At a shout from the boat, the chain that closes the mouth of the port was lowered, and in a second they were, as Dantès knew, in the Frial and outside the inner harbor. The prisoner's first feeling was of joy at again breathing the pure air, for air is freedom, but he soon sighed, for he passed before La Réserve, where he had that morning been so happy, and now through the open windows came the laughter and revelry of a ball. Dantès folded his hands, raised his eyes to heaven, and prayed fervently. 0111M. The boat continued her voyage. They had passed the Tête de Mort, were now off the Anse du Pharaon, and about to double the battery. This maneuver was incomprehensible to Dantès. "Whither are you taking me?" asked he. "You will soon know. But still, we are forbidden to give you any explanation." Dantès, trained in discipline, knew that nothing would be more absurd than to question subordinates, who were forbidden to reply, and so he remained silent. The most vague and wild thoughts passed through his mind. The boat they were in could not make a long voyage. There was no vessel at anchor outside the harbor. He thought, perhaps, they were going to leave him on some distant point. He was not bound, nor had they made any attempt to handcuff him. This seemed a good augury. Besides, had not the deputy, who had been so kind to him, told him that provided he did not pronounce the dreaded name of Noirtier, he had nothing to apprehend? Had not Villefort in his presence destroyed the fatal letter, the only proof against him? He waited silently, striving to pierce through the darkness. They had left the Isle Ratonneau, where the lighthouse stood, on the right, and were now opposite the Point de Catalans. It seemed to the prisoner that he could distinguish a feminine form on the beach, for it was there Mercédès dwelt. How was it that a presentiment did not warn Mercédès that her lover was within 300 yards of her? One light alone was visible, and Dantès saw that it came from Mercédès' chamber. Mercédès was the only one awake in the whole settlement. A loud cry could be heard by her, but pride restrained him and he did not utter it. What would his guards think if they heard him shout like a madman? He remained silent, his eyes fixed upon the light. The boat went on, but the prisoner thought only of Mercédès. An intervening elevation of land hid the light. Dantès turned and perceived that they had got out to sea. While he had been absorbed in thought, they had shipped their oars and hoisted sail. The boat was now moving with the wind. In spite of his repugnance to address the guards, Dantès turned to the nearest gendarme, and taking his hand, "Comrade," said he, "I adjure you as a Christian and a soldier, to tell me where we are going. I am Captain Dantès, a loyal Frenchman, thought accused of treason. Tell me where you are conducting me, and I promise you on my honor I will submit to my fate." The gendarme looked irresolutely at his companion, who returned for answer a sign that said, "I see no great harm in telling him now," and the gendarme replied, "You are a native of Marseilles and a sailor, and yet you do not know where you are going?" "On my honor, I have no idea." "Have you no idea whatever?" "None at all." "That is impossible." "I swear to you it is true. Tell me, I entreat." "But my orders." "Your orders do not forbid your telling me what I must know in 10 minutes, in half an hour or an hour. You see I cannot escape, even if I intended. Unless you are blind, or have never been outside the harbor, you must know." "I do not." "Look round you then." Dantès rose and looked forward, when he saw rise within 100 yards of him the black and frowning rock on which stands the Château d'If. This gloomy fortress, which has for more than 300 years furnished food for so many wild legends, seemed to Dantès like a scaffold to a malefactor. "The Château d'If," cried he. "What are we going there for?" The gendarme smiled. "I am not going there to be imprisoned," said Dantès. "It is only used for political prisoners. I have committed no crime. Are there any magistrates or judges at the Château d'If?" "There are only," said the gendarme, "a governor, a garrison, turnkeys, and good thick walls. Come, come, do not look so astonished, or you will make me think you are laughing at me in return for my good nature." Dantès pressed the gendarme's hand as though he would crush it. "You think then," said he, "that I am taken to the Château d'If to be imprisoned there? It is probable, but there is no occasion to squeeze so hard. Without any inquiry, without any formality? All the formalities have been gone through. The inquiry is already made. And so, in spite of M. de Villefort's promises? I do not know what M. de Villefort promised you," said the gendarme, "but I know we are taking you to the Château d'If. But what are you doing? Help, comrades, help." By a rapid movement, which the gendarmes practiced I had perceived, Dantès sprang forward to precipitate himself into the sea. But for vigorous arms seized him as his feet quitted the bottom of the boat. He fell back cursing with rage. "Good," said the gendarme, placing his knee on his chest. "This is the way you keep your word as a sailor. Believe soft-spoken gentlemen again. Hark ye, my friend, I have disobeyed my first order, but I will not disobey the second. And if you move, I will blow your brains out." And he leveled his carbine at Dantès, who felt the muzzle against his temple. For a moment the idea of struggling crossed his mind, and of so ending the unexpected evil that had overtaken him. But he bethought him of M. de Villefort's promise, and besides, death in a boat from the hand of a gendarme seemed too terrible. He remained motionless, but gnashing his teeth and wringing his hands with fury. At this moment the boat came to a landing with a violent shock. One of the sailors leaped on shore, a cord creaked as it ran through a pulley, and Dantès guessed they were at the end of the voyage, and that they were mooring the boat. His guards, taking him by the arms and coat collar, forced him to rise, and dragged him towards the steps that lead to the gate of the fortress, while the police officer carrying a musket with fixed bayonet followed behind. Dantès made no resistance. He was like a man in a dream. He saw soldiers drawn up on the embankment. He knew vaguely that he was ascending a flight of steps. He was conscious that he passed through a door, and that the door closed behind him, but all this indistinctly as through a mist. He did not even see the ocean, that terrible barrier against freedom, which the prisoners look upon with utter despair. They halted for a minute, during which he strove to collect his thoughts. He looked around. He was in a court surrounded by high walls. He heard the measured tread of sentinels, and as they passed before the light he saw the barrels of their muskets shine. They waited upwards of 10 minutes. Certain Dantès could not escape, the gendarmes released him. They seemed awaiting orders. The orders came. "Where is the prisoner?" said a voice. "Here," replied the gendarmes. Let him follow me. I will take him to his cell. Go, said the gendarmes, thrusting Dantès forward. The prisoner followed his guide, who led him into a room almost underground, whose bare and reeking walls seemed as though impregnated with tears. A lamp placed on a stool illumined the apartment faintly, and showed Dantès the features of his conductor, an under-jailer, ill-clothed and of sullen appearance. 0113M. Here is your chamber for tonight, said he. It is late, and the governor is asleep. Tomorrow perhaps he may change you. In the meantime there is bread, water, and fresh straw. And that is all a prisoner can wish for. Good night. And before Dantès could open his mouth, before he had noticed where the jailer placed his bread or the water, before he had glanced towards the corner where the straw was, the jailer disappeared, taking with him the lamp and closing the door, leaving stamped upon the prisoner's mind the dim reflection of the dripping walls of his dungeon. Dantès was alone in darkness and in silence, cold as the shadows that he felt breathe on his burning forehead. With the first dawn of day the jailer returned, with orders to leave Dantès where he was. He found the prisoner in the same position, as if fixed there, his eyes swollen with weeping. He had passed the night standing, and without sleep. The jailer advanced. Dantès appeared not to perceive him. He touched him on the shoulder. Edmond started. Have you not slept? Said the jailer. I do not know, replied Dantès. The jailer stared. Are you hungry? Continued he. I do not know. Do you wish for anything? I wish to see the governor. The jailer shrugged his shoulders and left the chamber. Dantès followed him with his eyes, and stretched forth his hands towards the open door, but the door closed. All his emotion then burst forth. He cast himself on the ground, weeping bitterly, and asking himself what crime he had committed that he was thus punished. The day passed thus. He scarcely tasted food, but walked round and round the cell like a wild beast in its cage. One thought in particular tormented him, namely, that during his journey hither he had sat so still, whereas he might, a dozen times, have plunged into the sea, and thanks to his powers of swimming, for which he was famous, have gained the shore, concealed himself until the arrival of a Genoese or Spanish vessel, escaped to Spain or Italy, where Mercedes and his father could have joined him. He had no fears as to how he should live. Good seamen are welcome everywhere. He spoke Italian like a Tuscan, and Spanish like a Castilian. He would have been free and happy with Mercedes and his father, whereas he was now confined in the Château d'If, that impregnable fortress, ignorant of the future destiny of his father and Mercedes, and all this because he had trusted to Villefort's promise. The thought was maddening, and Dantès threw himself furiously down on his straw. The next morning at the same hour, the jailer came again. Well, said the jailer, are you more reasonable today? Dantès made no reply. Come, cheer up. Is there anything that I can do for you? I wish to see the governor. I have already told you it was impossible. Why so? Because it is against prison rules, and prisoners must not even ask for it. What is allowed then? Better fare if you pay for it, books and leave to walk about. I do not want books, I am satisfied with my food, and do not care to walk about, but I wish to see the governor. If you worry me by repeating the same thing, I will not bring you any more to eat. Well then, said Edmond, if you do not, I shall die of hunger, that is all. The jailer saw by his tone he would be happy to die, and as every prisoner is worth 10 sous a day to his jailer, he replied in a more subdued tone. What you ask is impossible, but if you are very well behaved you will be allowed to walk about, and some day you will meet the governor, and if he chooses to reply, that is his affair. But, asked Dantès, how long shall I have to wait? A month, 6 months, a year. It is too long a time. I wish to see him at once. Ah, said the jailer, do not always brood over what is impossible, or you will be mad in a fortnight. You think so? Yes, we have an instance here. It was by always offering 1,000,000 of francs to the governor for his liberty that an abbé became mad, who was in this chamber before you. 0119M. How long has he left it? 2 years. Was he liberated then? No, he was put in a dungeon. Listen, said Dantès. I am not an abbé, I am not mad. Perhaps I shall be, but at present, unfortunately, I am not. I will make you another offer. What is that? I do not offer you 1,000,000 because I have it not, but I will give you 100 crowns if, the first time you go to Marseilles, you will seek out a young girl named Mercedes, at the Catalans, and give her 2 lines from me. 0120M. If I took them, and were detected, I should lose my place, which is worth 2,000 francs a year, so that I should be a great fool to run such a risk for 300. Well, said Dantès, mark this, if you refuse at least to tell Mercedes I am here, I will some day hide myself behind the door, and when you enter I will dash out your brains with this stool. Threats, cried the jailer, retreating and putting himself on the defensive. You are certainly going mad. The abbé began like you, and in 3 days you will be like him, mad enough to tie up. But fortunately, there are dungeons here. Dantès whirled the stool round his head. All right, said the jailer. All right, since you will have it so. I will send word to the governor. Very well, returned Dantès, dropping the stool and sitting on it as if he were in reality mad. The jailer went out, and returned in an instant with a corporal and 4 soldiers. By the governor's orders, said he, conduct the prisoner to the tier beneath. To the dungeon, then, said the corporal. Yes, we must put the madman with the madman. The soldiers seized Dantès, who followed passively. He descended 15 steps, and the door of a dungeon was opened, and he was thrust in. The door closed, and Dantès advanced with outstretched hands until he touched the wall. He then sat down in the corner until his eyes became accustomed to the darkness. The jailer was right. Dantès wanted but little of being utterly mad. Chapter 9. The evening of the betrothal. Villefort had, as we have said, hastened back to Madame de Saint-Mérin's in the Place du Grand Cours, and on entering the house found that the guests whom he had left at table were taking coffee in the salon. René was, with all the rest of the company, anxiously awaiting him, and his entrance was followed by a general exclamation. Well, decapitator, guardian of the state, royalist Brutus, what is the matter? Said one. Speak out. Are we threatened with a fresh reign of terror? Asked another. Has the Corsican ogre broken loose? Cried a third. Marquise, said Villefort, approaching his future mother-in-law, I request your pardon for thus leaving you. Will the Marquis honor me by a few moments' private conversation? It is really a serious matter, then? Asked the Marquis, remarking the cloud on Villefort's brow. So serious that I must take leave of you for a few days, so, added he, turning to René, judge for yourself if it be not important. You are going to leave us? Cried René, unable to hide her emotion at this unexpected announcement. Alas, returned Villefort, I must. Where then are you going? Asked the Marquise. That, madam, is an official secret, but if you have any commissions for Paris, a friend of mine is going there tonight, and will with pleasure undertake them. The guests looked at each other. You wish to speak to me alone? Said the Marquis. Yes, let us go to the library, please. The Marquis took his arm, and they left the salon. Well, asked he as soon as they were by themselves, tell me what it is? An affair of the greatest importance, that demands my immediate presence in Paris. Now, excuse the indiscretion, Marquis, but have you any landed property? All my fortune is in the funds, 700,000 or 800,000 francs. Then sell out, Marquis, or you will lose it all. 0123M. But how can I sell out here? You have a broker, have you not? Yes. Then give me a letter to him, and tell him to sell out without an instant's delay. Perhaps even now I shall arrive too late. The deuce you say, replied the Marquis. Let us lose no time then. And sitting down, he wrote a letter to his broker, ordering him to sell out at the market price. Now then, said Villefort, placing the letter in his pocketbook, I must have another. To whom? To the king. To the king. Yes. I dare not write to his majesty. I do not ask you to write to his majesty, but ask M. de Salvieux to do so. I want a letter that will enable me to reach the king's presence without all the formalities of demanding an audience. That would occasion a loss of precious time. But address yourself to the keeper of the seals. He has the right of entry at the Tuileries, and can procure you audience at any hour of the day or night. Doubtless. But there is no occasion to divide the honors of my discovery with him. The keeper would leave me in the background, and take all the glory to himself. I tell you, Marquis, my fortune is made if I only reach the Tuileries the first, for the king will not forget the service I do him. In that case, go and get ready. I will call Salvius and make him write the letter. Be as quick as possible. I must be on the road in a quarter of an hour. Tell your coachman to stop at the door. You will present my excuses to the Marquise and Mademoiselle Renée, whom I leave on such a day with great regret. You will find them both here, and can make your farewells in person. 1,000 thanks, and now for the letter. The Marquis rang, a servant entered. Say to the Comte de Salvius that I would like to see him. Now then go, said the Marquis. I shall be gone only a few moments. Villefort hastily quitted the apartment, but reflecting that the sight of the deputy procureur running through the streets would be enough to throw the whole city into confusion, he resumed his ordinary pace. At his door he perceived a figure in the shadow that seemed to wait for him. It was Mercédès who, hearing no news of her lover, had come unobserved to inquire after him. As Villefort drew near, she advanced and stood before him. Dantès had spoken of Mercédès, and Villefort instantly recognized her. Her beauty and high bearing surprised him, and when she inquired what had become of her lover, it seemed to him that she was the judge, and he the accused. The young man you speak of, said Villefort abruptly, is a great criminal, and I can do nothing for him, mademoiselle. Mercédès burst into tears, and as Villefort strove to pass her, again addressed him. But at least tell me where he is, that I may know whether he is alive or dead, said she. 0125M. I do not know, he is no longer in my hands, replied Villefort. And desirous of putting an end to the interview, he pushed by her and closed the door, as if to exclude the pain he felt. But remorse is not thus banished. Like Virgil's wounded hero, he carried the arrow in his wound, and arrived at the salon, Villefort uttered a sigh that was almost a sob, and sank into a chair. Then the first pangs of an unending torture seized upon his heart. The man he sacrificed to his ambition, that innocent victim immolated on the altar of his father's faults, appeared to him pale and threatening, leading his affianced bride by the hand, and bringing with him remorse, not such as the ancients figured, furious and terrible, but that slow and consuming agony whose pangs are intensified from hour to hour up to the very moment of death. Then he had a moment's hesitation. He had frequently called for capital punishment on criminals, and owing to his irresistible eloquence they had been condemned, and yet the slightest shadow of remorse had never clouded Villefort's brow, because they were guilty, at least he believed so, but here was an innocent man whose happiness he had destroyed. In this case he was not the judge, but the executioner. As he thus reflected, he felt the sensation we have described, and which had hitherto been unknown to him, arise in his bosom, and fill him with vague apprehensions. It is thus that a wounded man trembles instinctively at the approach of the finger to his wound until it be healed, but Villefort's was one of those that never close, or if they do, only close to reopen more agonizing than ever. If at this moment the sweet voice of Renée had sounded in his ears pleading for mercy, or the fair Mercédès had entered and said, "In the name of God, I conjure you to restore me my affianced husband," his cold and trembling hands would have signed his release. But no voice broke the stillness of the chamber, and the door was opened only by Villefort's valet, who came to tell him that the traveling carriage was in readiness. Villefort rose, or rather sprang, from his chair, hastily opened one of the drawers of his desk, emptied all the gold it contained into his pocket, stood motionless an instant, his hand pressed to his head, muttered a few inarticulate sounds, and then, perceiving that his servant had placed his cloak on his shoulders, he sprang into the carriage, ordering the postilions to drive to M. de Saint Mérin's. The hapless Dantès was doomed. As the Marquis had promised, Villefort found the Marquise and Renée in waiting. He started when he saw Renée, for he fancied she was again about to plead for Dantès. Alas, her emotions were wholly personal. She was thinking only of Villefort's departure. She loved Villefort, and he left her at the moment he was about to become her husband. Villefort knew not when he should return, and Renée, far from pleading for Dantès, hated the man whose crime separated her from her lover. 0127M. Meanwhile, what of Mercédès? She had met Fernand at the corner of the Rue de la Loge. She had returned to the Catalans, and had despairingly cast herself on her couch. Fernand, kneeling by her side, took her hand, and covered it with kisses that Mercedes did not even feel. She passed the night thus. The lamp went out for want of oil, but she paid no heed to the darkness, and dawn came, but she knew not that it was day. Grief had made her blind to all but one object. That was Edmond. "Ah, you are there," said she at length, turning towards Fernand. "I have not quitted you since yesterday," returned Fernand sorrowfully. Morel had not readily given up the fight. He had learned that Dantès had been taken to prison, and he had gone to all his friends, and the influential persons of the city, but the report was already in circulation that Dantès was arrested as a Bonapartist agent, and as the most sanguine looked upon any attempt of Napoleon to remount the throne as impossible, he met with nothing but refusal, and had returned home in despair, declaring that the matter was serious and that nothing more could be done. Catullus was equally restless and uneasy, but instead of seeking, like Morel, to aid Dantès, he had shut himself up with 2 bottles of black currant brandy, in the hope of drowning reflection. But he did not succeed, and became too intoxicated to fetch any more drink, and yet not so intoxicated as to forget what had happened. With his elbows on the table he sat between the 2 empty bottles, while spectres danced in the light of the unsnuffed candle. Spectres such as Hoffmann strews over his punch-drenched pages, like black, fantastic dust. Danglars alone was content and joyous. He had got rid of an enemy and made his own situation on the Pharaon secure. Danglars was one of those men born with a pen behind the ear, and an inkstand in place of a heart. Everything with him was multiplication or subtraction. The life of a man was to him of far less value than a numeral, especially when, by taking it away, he could increase the sum total of his own desires. He went to bed at his usual hour, and slept in peace. Villefort, after having received M. de Salvieux's letter, embraced Renée, kissed the Marquise's hand, and shaken that of the Marquis, started for Paris along the Aix road. Old Dantès was dying with anxiety to know what had become of Edmond. But we know very well what had become of Edmond. Chapter 10. The King's Closet at the Tuileries. We will leave Villefort on the road to Paris, traveling, thanks to trebled fees, with all speed, and passing through 2 or 3 apartments, enter at the Tuileries the little room with the arched window, so well known as having been the favorite closet of Napoleon and Louis XVIII, and now of Louis Philippe. There, seated before a walnut table he had brought with him from Hartwell, and to which, from one of those fancies not uncommon to great people, he was particularly attached, the King Louis XVIII was carelessly listening to a man of 50 or 52 years of age, with grey hair, aristocratic bearing, and exceedingly gentlemanly attire, and meanwhile making a marginal note in a volume of Griffius's rather inaccurate, but much sought-after, edition of Horace, a work which was much indebted to the sagacious observations of the philosophical monarch. "You say, sir," said the king, "that I am exceedingly disquieted, sire. Really, have you had a vision of the 7 fat kine and the 7 lean kine?" "No, sire, for that would only betoken for us 7 years of plenty and 7 years of scarcity. And with a king as full of foresight as your majesty, scarcity is not a thing to be feared." "Then of what other scourge are you afraid, my dear Blocas?" "Sire, I have every reason to believe that a storm is brewing in the south." "Well, my dear Duke," replied Louis XVIII, "I think you are wrongly informed, and know positively that, on the contrary, it is very fine weather in that direction." Man of ability as he was, Louis XVIII liked a pleasant jest. "Sire," continued M. de Blocas, "if it only be to reassure a faithful servant, will your majesty send into Languedoc, Provence, and Dauphiné trusty men, who will bring you back a faithful report as to the feeling in these 3 provinces?" "Can I, Monsieur Dis?" replied the king, continuing the annotations in his Horace. "Sire," replied the courtier, laughing, in order that he might seem to comprehend the quotation, "your majesty may be perfectly right in relying on the good feeling of France, but I fear I am not altogether wrong in dreading some desperate attempt." "By whom?" "By Bonaparte, or at least by his adherents." "My dear Blocas," said the king, "you with your alarms prevent me from working. And you, sire, prevent me from sleeping with your security. Wait, my dear sir, wait a moment. for I have such a delightful note on the pastor cum traharet. Wait, and I will listen to you afterwards. There was a brief pause, during which Louis XVIII wrote, in a hand as small as possible, another note on the margin of his Horace, and then looking at the Duke with the air of a man who thinks he has an idea of his own, while he is only commenting upon the idea of another, said, "Go on, my dear Duke, go on, I listen." "Sire," said Blocas, who had for a moment the hope of sacrificing Villefort to his own profit, "I am compelled to tell you that these are not mere rumors destitute of foundation which thus disquiet me, but a serious-minded man, deserving all my confidence, and charged by me to watch over the south." The Duke hesitated as he pronounced these words. "Has arrived by post to tell me that a great peril threatens the king, and so I hasten to you, sire." "Mala ducis avidomum," continued Louis XVIII, still annotating. "Does your Majesty wish me to drop the subject?" "By no means, my dear Duke, but just stretch out your hand." "Which?" "Whichever you please, there to the left." "Here, sire?" "I tell you to the left, and you are looking to the right." "I mean on my left, yes, there. You will find yesterday's report of the Minister of Police. But here is M. D'André himself." And M. D'André, announced by the Chamberlain-in-waiting, entered. "Come in," said Louis XVIII, with repressed smile. "Come in, Baron, and tell the Duke all you know, the latest news of M. de Bonaparte. Do not conceal anything, however serious. Let us see, the island of Elba is a volcano, and we may expect to have issuing thence flaming and bristling war. Bella, horrida bella." M. D'André leaned very respectfully on the back of a chair with his two hands and said, "Has your Majesty perused yesterday's report?" "Yes, yes, but tell the Duke himself, who cannot find anything, what the report contains. Give him the particulars of what the usurper is doing in his islet." "Monsieur," said the Baron to the Duke, "all the servants of His Majesty must approve of the latest intelligence which we have from the island of Elba. Bonaparte." M. D'André looked at Louis XVIII, who, employed in writing a note, did not even raise his head. "Bonaparte," continued the Baron, "is mortally wearied, and passes whole days in watching his miners at work at Porto-Longon." "And scratches himself for amusement," added the king. "Scratches himself?" inquired the Duke. "What does your Majesty mean?" "Yes, indeed, my dear Duke. Did you forget that this great man, this hero, this demigod, is attacked with a malady of the skin which worries him to death, prurigo? And moreover, my dear Duke," continued the Minister of Police, "we are almost assured that, in a very short time, the usurper will be insane." "Insane. Raving mad. His head becomes weaker. Sometimes he weeps bitterly, sometimes laughs boisterously. At other time he passes hours on the seashore, flinging stones in the water, and when the flint makes duck and drake 5 or 6 times, he appears as delighted as if he had gained another Marengo or Austerlitz. Now you must agree that these are indubitable symptoms of insanity." "Or of wisdom, my dear Baron, or of wisdom," said Louis XVIII, laughing. "The greatest captains of antiquity amused themselves by casting pebbles into the ocean. See Plutarch's Life of Scipio Africanus." M. de Blocas pondered deeply between the confident monarch and the truthful minister. Villefort, who did not choose to reveal the whole secret, lest another should reap all the benefit of the disclosure, had yet communicated enough to cause him the greatest uneasiness. "Well, well, D'André," said Louis XVIII, "Blocas is not yet convinced. Let us proceed, therefore, to the usurper's conversion." The Minister of Police bowed. "The usurper's conversion," murmured the Duke, looking at the King and D'André, who spoke alternately like Virgil's shepherds. "The usurper converted." "Decidedly, my dear Duke." "In what way converted?" "To good principles." "Tell him all about it, Baron." "Why, this is the way of it," said the minister, with the gravest air in the world. "Napoleon lately had a review, and as 2 or 3 of his old veterans expressed a desire to return to France, he gave them their dismissal, and exhorted them to serve the good king. These were his own words, of that I am certain." "Well, Blocas, what think you of this?" inquired the king triumphantly, and pausing for a moment from the voluminous scholiast before him. "I say, sire, that the Minister of Police is greatly deceived, or I am." And as it is impossible it can be the Minister of Police as he has the guardianship of the safety and honor of your Majesty, it is probable that I am in error. However, sire, if I might advise, your Majesty will interrogate the person of whom I spoke to you, and I will urge your Majesty to do him this honor. Most willingly, Duke. Under your auspices I will receive any person you please, but you must not expect me to be too confiding. Baron, have you any report more recent than this, dated the February 20th? And this is the 3rd of March. No, sire, but I am hourly expecting one. It may have arrived since I left my office. Go thither, and if there be none, well, continued Louis XVIII. Make one. That is the usual way, is it not? And the king laughed facetiously. Oh, sire, replied the minister, we have no occasion to invent any. Every day our desks are loaded with most circumstantial denunciations, coming from hosts of people who hope for some return for services which they seek to render, but cannot. They trust to fortune, and rely upon some unexpected event in some way to justify their predictions. Well, sir, go, said Louis XVIII. And remember that I am waiting for you. I will but go and return, sire. I shall be back in 10 minutes. And I, sire, said M. de Blocas, will go and find my messenger. Wait, sir, wait, said Louis XVIII. Really, M. de Blocas, I must change your armorial bearings. I will give you an eagle with outstretched wings, holding in its claws a prey which tries in vain to escape, and bearing this device, 10x. 0133M. Sire, I listen, said de Blocas, biting his nails with impatience. I wish to consult you on this passage, Molly Fugens Angelitu. You know it refers to a stag flying from a wolf. Are you not a sportsman and a great wolf hunter? Well then, what do you think of the Molly Angelitu? Admirable, sire. But my messenger is like the stag you refer to, for he has posted 220 leagues in scarcely 3 days. Which is undergoing great fatigue and anxiety, my dear Duke, when we have a telegraph which transmits messages in 3 or 4 hours, and that without getting in the least out of breath. Ah, sire, you recompense but badly this poor young man, who has come so far, and with so much ardor, to give your Majesty useful information. If only for the sake of M. de Salvieux, who recommends him to me, I entreat your Majesty to receive him graciously. M. de Salvieux, my brother's chamberlain? Yes, sire. He is at Marseilles, and writes me thence. Does he speak to you of this conspiracy? No, but strongly recommends M. de Villefort, and begs me to present him to your Majesty. M. de Villefort, cried the king. Is the messenger's name M. de Villefort? Yes, sire. And he comes from Marseilles? In person. Why did you not mention his name at once? Replied the king, betraying some uneasiness. Sire, I thought his name was unknown to your Majesty. No, Blocas, he is a man of strong and elevated understanding, ambitious too, and pardieu. You know his father's name. His father? Yes, Noirtier. Noirtier the Girondin. Noirtier the senator? He himself. And your Majesty has employed the son of such a man? Blocas, my friend, you have but limited comprehension. I told you Villefort was ambitious, and to attain this ambition Villefort would sacrifice everything, even his father. Then, sire, may I present him? This instant, Duke. Where is he? Waiting below in my carriage. Seek him at once. I hasten to do so. The Duke left the royal presence with the speed of a young man. His really sincere royalism made him youthful again. Louis XVIII remained alone, and turning his eyes on his half-opened Horace, muttered, Justum et tenacem propositi virum. M. de Blocas returned as speedily as he had departed, but in the antechamber he was forced to appeal to the king's authority. Villefort's dusty garb, his costume, which was not of courtly cut, excited the susceptibility of M. de Brézé, who was all astonishment at finding that this young man had the audacity to enter before the king in such attire. The Duke, however, overcame all difficulties with a word, His Majesty's order. And in spite of the protestations which the Master of Ceremonies made for the honor of his office and principles, Villefort was introduced. The king was seated in the same place where the Duke had left him. On opening the door, Villefort found himself facing him, and the young magistrate's first impulse was to pause. Come in, M. de Villefort, said the king, come in. Villefort bowed, and advancing a few steps, waited until the king should interrogate him. M. de Villefort, said Louis XVIII. The Duc de Blocas assures me you have some interesting information to communicate. Sire, the Duke is right, and I believe your Majesty will think it equally important. 0137M. In the first place, and before everything else, sir, is the news as bad in your opinion as I am asked to believe? Sire, I believe it to be most urgent, but I hope by the speed I have used, that it is not irreparable. Speak as fully as you please, sir, said the king, who began to give way to the emotion which had showed itself in Blocas's face and affected Villefort's voice. Speak, sir, and pray begin at the beginning. I like order in everything. Sire, said Villefort, I will render a faithful report to your Majesty, but I must entreat your forgiveness if my anxiety leads to some obscurity in my language. A glance at the king after this discreet and subtle exordium assured Villefort of the benignity of his august auditor, and he went on. Sire, I have come as rapidly to Paris as possible, to inform your Majesty that I have discovered, in the exercise of my duties, not a commonplace and insignificant plot, such as is every day got up in the lower ranks of the people and in the army, but an actual conspiracy, a storm which menaces no less than your Majesty's throne. Sire, the usurper is arming 3 ships, he meditates some project, which however mad, is yet, perhaps, terrible. At this moment he will have left Elba, to go whither I know not, but assuredly to attempt a landing either at Naples, or on the coast of Tuscany, or perhaps on the shores of France. Your Majesty is well aware that the sovereign of the island of Elba has maintained his relations with Italy and France. I am, sir, said the king, much agitated. And recently we have had information that the Bonapartist clubs have had meetings in the Rue Saint-Jacques. But proceed, I beg of you. How did you obtain these details? Sire, they are the results of an examination which I have made of a man of Marseilles, whom I have watched for some time, and arrested on the day of my departure. This person, a sailor, of turbulent character, and whom I suspected of Bonapartism, has been secretly to the island of Elba. There he saw the Grand Marshal, who charged him with an oral message to a Bonapartist in Paris, whose name I could not extract from him. But this mission was to prepare men's minds for a return. It is the man who says this, sire. A return which will soon occur. And where is this man? In prison, sire. And the matter seems serious to you? So serious, sire, that when the circumstance surprised me in the midst of a family festival, on the very day of my betrothal, I left my bride and friends, postponing everything, that I might hasten to lay at your Majesty's feet the fears which impressed me, and the assurance of my devotion. True, said Louis XVIII. Was there not a marriage engagement between you and Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, daughter of one of your Majesty's most faithful servants? Yes, yes, but let us talk of this plot, M. de Villefort. Sire, I fear it is more than a plot. I fear it is a conspiracy. A conspiracy in these times, said Louis XVIII, smiling, is a thing very easy to meditate, but more difficult to conduct to an end, inasmuch as re-established so recently on the throne of our ancestors. We have our eyes open at once upon the past, the present, and the future. For the last 10 months my ministers have redoubled their vigilance, in order to watch the shore of the Mediterranean. If Bonaparte landed at Naples, the whole coalition would be on foot before he could even reach Piombino. If he land in Tuscany, he will be in an unfriendly territory. If he land in France, it must be with a handful of men, and the result of that is easily foretold, execrated as he is by the population. Take courage, sir, but at the same time rely on our royal gratitude. Ah, here is M. d'André, cried de Blocas. At this instant the Minister of Police appeared at the door, pale, trembling, and as if ready to faint. Villefort was about to retire, but M. de Blocas, taking his hand, restrained him.